Nick left the warehouse after looking around for a bit. There hadn't been much of interest inside. Even though Marcus hadn't been very thorough, he hadn't lied at least. After leaving the pillar, Nick looked around. Nobody had entered the underground, even though over half a day had passed. There's not much point in checking the northern ruins, but I'll still do it, just to finish the trip. Nick hadn't told anyone that he'd also be checking the northern ruins, but that didn't matter. If he didn't want to be found, he wouldn't be found. Nick turned into mist and entered the tunnel leading to the northern ruins. There was a gate, but Nick bypassed it easily with his abilities. There were other people here. Nick recognized around 70% of them. They're all scientists who used to work for Ghosty, Nick thought. Since Ghosty had left Crimson City, the scientists had simply joined the city and continued their research here. The secret ruins consisted of one huge hall and a couple of small rooms. The rooms were just offices or break rooms, while the big hall held all the research. A humongous machine stood in the middle of the hall, a pedestal for a gigantic ball, 10 meters in diameter, though no ball sat on it now. The pedestal was mirrored on the ceiling. If someone put a big ball there, it would fit perfectly. Zzzt. From time to time, sparks came off the pedestal before vanishing. Nick recognized what they were immediately. It's either pure energy or star energy, Nick thought. He felt a flicker of nervousness. It seems like this factory keeps trying to restart itself, Nick thought, looking around. Some of the machines had lights coming from them, but like all the machinery of the enlightened ones, there were no buttons or panels to interact with. One needed a seed for that. Some machines don't work anymore, others still seem to. Nick studied the pedestal as it kept trying to do something. Most likely, this is related to harvesting star energy, he thought. He remembered the gigantic ball of fire he'd once found in the ruins east of Crimson City, a ball that had turned out to be a powerful fallen possession specter. That ball could fit in these pedestals. What better way to harvest star energy than to create a small star inside a factory? It's possible this facility exists purely to make star energy. Zzzt. The pedestal sputtered again. Apparently, that happened about once every minute, and every time it did, Nick felt a bit nervous. That explains why Specters avoid this whole area. Up on the surface, they might not feel the actual burst of star energy, but something inside them tells them it isn't safe here. That also explains why it hits Specters at every power level. Not even demons or fanatics stayed here. The Specters aren't in any real danger. They just feel like they are. The sound the pedestal made was nearly identical to the vibrations from the machines in the poor people's houses. The scientists here kept trying to figure out what the machine was for, but without a seed, it was basically impossible. I believe most of the actual machine isn't here anymore, Nick thought. If these pedestals were meant to contain a star, nobody could work here at all. Stars are quite hot. There was probably an entire structure around this pedestal, made of materials infused with star energy and pure energy. Over the years, they were likely eroded by the prefix. Materials treated with Zephyx don't erode from prefix exposure, but the others might. It's possible far more has been lost to time than we assumed. We always thought the old buildings were mostly intact. That doesn't seem to be true. Sadly, like the scientists, Nick was helpless here. He could guess at the machine's purpose, but he couldn't interact with it. He'd need a working seed of his own. After looking over the northern ruins, Nick went back to the city. No reason to check any other ruins for now. I should focus on the Specter. Even if it can't communicate quickly, I'll still learn more from it than from digging blindly through ruins. Nick left the underground and reappeared in front of the hole he'd entered through. "Welcome back, sir," a guard called out as Nick climbed out. Naturally, Nick had already put his disguise back on. "I'm done with my investigation. You may enter the underground again," Nick said. The guard quickly called Herman back, who appeared before Nick within a minute. "Did everything go well?" Herman asked politely. "Pretty well," Nick answered. "I might return with some colleagues to continue the investigation." Herman looked a bit surprised. They hadn't found anything of note underground except for the ruins to the north, and the special agent probably hadn't even reached those yet. Had he found something valuable that they'd overlooked? "Did anybody disturb you during your investigation?" Herman asked. "No, everything was fine. Nobody needed to die," Nick answered. "Glad to hear it, sir," Herman said. "Do you require my services for something else?" "Yes, I need to meet the governor again for a different matter. Could you call him?" Nick asked. "Certainly, sir," Herman said, leading Nick out through the megastructure's wall. There was no reason to stay. Some moments later, William Drawhand, the governor, arrived in front of Nick. "How may I assist, Special Agent?" he asked with a quick but polite greeting. "I've completed my initial inspection of the ruins, and I've found something of great relevance to Aegis beneath the city," Nick said. William looked surprised. "What did you find?" "Apologies, but I can't reveal that to you. The important part is that I'll be returning regularly with some colleagues. During these visits, I expect full cooperation from your side. However, we'll also exercise due diligence and not disturb Crimson City's daily life." William seemed a bit annoyed. Nick hadn't talked to William much. William had been on the nicer side as a hero, but he was clearly still someone interested in his own power. The way the new outer ring was treated spoke volumes of that. Nick wasn't his greatest fan, though in his mind, William was just barely above the threshold of corrupt. There were far worse governors out there. "Special Agent, with all due respect." "Here it comes," Nick thought. "They always say that before something dumb. But as the governor of Crimson City, I do believe that I have the right to know about what my city contains. The safety and happiness of my subjects is my responsibility, and I think my ability to perform my work." "You done talking soon," Nick thought. "Is severely impeded if I do not have access to all the information Aegis has about Crimson City, so I implore you to please share with me what you have found. Is it something I need to be careful of? Is it something dangerous? What kind of effects will all of this have on the city? Were you once a governor as well? If so, you probably understand where I am coming from." Silence. "Guess he's done," Nick thought. "You are a servant of Aegis," Nick said. "This city belongs to Aegis. Aegis interests supersede those of any local government. Our investigation will have no impact on your city whatsoever. Most of the time, you won't even know we're here. I will not give you any more information, and I advise against bringing up that topic again. Am I understood?" Nick could tell William was doing his best to keep his expression under control. "I understand," William said. "It will not happen again." "Good," Nick said. "Then I require your assistance with one more matter before I go." "Yes," William asked. "Crimson City holds a Specter that Aegis wishes to study, and I'm here to see to that. A couple of decades ago, it should have been confiscated by the city. Its name is the Fiend of Darkness. I want to study it." Chapter 722, The Fiend of Darkness. "The Fiend of Darkness," William repeated. "I think we have a Specter like that. I don't know every Specter that we own, but I recall hearing its name a couple of times before." "You don't even know all of your fanatics," Nick thought with annoyance. "I'm really not sure if this guy should be made an agent." "You should have such a Specter," Nick said. "If you don't have sufficient information about your Specters, please bring me into contact with someone who does." That sounded a bit more passive-aggressive than I wanted, but it's already out now, Nick thought. Nick was trying his best to change the way he communicated so that nobody would connect him to his old persona, but sometimes something slipped through. Luckily, no one would connect this extremely powerful special agent with an expert. It had barely been a couple of decades. At most, Nick would have become an initial specialist by now. Naturally, Nick didn't even cross William's mind at the passive-aggressive remark. "If my expertise is not to your satisfaction, I will refer you to the person that is responsible for our Specters," William said, in a subtle passive-aggressive dig of his own. Nick just nodded. William didn't let any of his annoyance show on his face while his barrier activated. A moment later, he called somebody over, and the person showed up just a couple of seconds later. "How can I help, Governor?" Vanessa Corinth said as she arrived. Vanessa Corinth was the former CEO of Cujoblitz after the entire war with Anatomy. She had been the overall leader of Cujoblitz, while Jornies had been the CZE. So she's responsible for all of the city's Specters now, Nick thought. "Vanessa, the special agent wishes to inquire about one of our Specters. Please support him in his endeavors," William said. Then William turned to Nick and performed a quick, polite bow. "Excuse me, I have business to attend to." Nick nodded while William walked away. "Yeah, I don't want this guy to become an agent. He really doesn't fit Aegis," Nick thought. "How can I assist, sir?" Vanessa asked with a charming smile. Naturally, she also wanted to become an agent, and making a good impression on somebody like Nick was important to her. "Crimson City should be in the possession of a Specter called the Fiend of Darkness. Aegis wishes to conduct a couple of experiments on it," Nick said. "Ah, the Fiend of Darkness," Vanessa said with a nod. "We do have such a Specter. It is currently a late fanatic, and it is quite a mysterious one. We do not know a lot about this Specter. Learning more about it might also help us. Shall I lead you to it right away?" Nick nodded, please. Vanessa nodded politely and led Nick to the center of the megastructure. The headquarters hadn't changed since Nick left. The two of them entered, and Vanessa led Nick to one of the containment units. A moment later, she looked at a sheet of paper stuck to the wall beside the containment unit's entrance. Nobody is currently working with it, she said. However, that was to be expected. We rarely work with it. Nick already knew the answer, but he asked anyway, not to seem suspicious. How come? Well, the Fiend of Darkness tends to kill its food, Vanessa said. We do not have many people that require execution, which is why the Fiend of Darkness rarely produces Zephyx. Do you require some food to study the Specter? That won't be necessary, Nick said. Very well, Vanessa answered before opening the door. Naturally, thanks to his barrier, Nick could pass through the employee entrance despite being a Specter. As soon as they entered, the gigantic piece of cloth attacked them. Shing! Nick pulled out one of his blades and pointed it at the cloth. Vanessa couldn't see the blade through Nick's disguise. She only saw the big black figure extend its arm toward the cloth. And then something shocking happened. The Fiend of Darkness stopped, and it seemed to stop voluntarily. Vanessa had never seen anything quite like it. The Fiend of Darkness was barely a mass of instincts. Communicating with it was impossible, and it attacked basically anyone it saw, no matter how powerful they were. Yet the special agent seemed to have an ability that let him influence it. Vanessa was fascinated. She hoped she'd one day become as powerful as him. Naturally, Nick had just communicated with the Fiend of Darkness. He knew it was so dumb it wouldn't recognize any human. Telling it that Nick was a Specter wasn't dangerous in the slightest. All Nick had done was infuse his power into his mind while talking to it. The Fiend of Darkness could feel that the person in black was extremely powerful, and that he'd be willing to kill it if it resisted. Of course, that second part wasn't true, but the Fiend of Darkness couldn't tell it was a lie. It answered immediately with a feeling of capitulation. It essentially said, I give up. What do you want me to do? Please don't kill me. Except its feelings were so primitive that even 3 sentences gave them more credit than they deserved. It was essentially just no. Do not be alarmed, Nick said to Vanessa. I know what I am doing. You may leave the containment unit. Please do not use any kind of surveillance to oversee my work here. I will be using highly confidential techniques and technologies. Of course, Vanessa said with a smile, opening the employee entrance again. Excuse me. Then she stepped out. After Vanessa left, Nick turned to the Fiend of Darkness again. Swallow me. When I tell you to return me, you will return me, Nick transmitted. The Fiend of Darkness sent back a confused feeling. Nick's instructions were too complicated. Follow my orders, Nick commanded. The Fiend of Darkness sent back a positive feeling. Swallow me. The Fiend of Darkness approached Nick and enveloped him. It didn't even know if it could swallow Specters or why it should swallow Nick at all. It just did it because Nick said so. As soon as it surrounded him, Nick deactivated his barrier and turned into mist. Just like the last time he'd been here, he found himself in the middle of the air, surrounded by nothing but darkness. Luckily, the darkness didn't impede his senses in any way, and his perception had grown far more powerful. As soon as Nick turned to mist, his ability reactivated too, which meant the Fiend of Darkness had lost him. Yet Nick didn't lose the Fiend of Darkness. It was camouflaged well as it flew through the air at impressive speed. Its body on this side wasn't a cloak, but a distortion, like the air in some places was warping slightly. That was the only sign of it. Nick stayed hidden and watched it for a while. The Fiend of Darkness randomly zipped around the space, doing nothing else. A moment later, Nick sent a voice transmission to the distortion. Stop moving. The distortion stopped. Nick had been fairly certain he could get out of here again, even if the Fiend of Darkness wouldn't listen to him. This place was somewhere on the planet, and Nick could move through almost all matter. He could get out one way or another. Still, being able to interact with the Fiend of Darkness made things much easier. It meant Nick could return to the place from which he'd entered, rather than having to explain why he'd gone into a containment unit only to reappear outside the city again. You may continue, Nick transmitted. Yet the Fiend of Darkness didn't resume zipping around. It probably didn't even realize it had been doing so, and didn't know what Nick meant by continuing. It just stood there, like telling a human they could relax the tongue in their mouth and put it back in a comfortable position. Some humans would be quite confused and not know what to do with their tongues now. Nick didn't bother with the Fiend of Darkness and looked around the space. His perception stretched for several kilometers, and he could see far more than the last time he'd been here. Gravity is extremely weak but present, Nick noted. Air basically doesn't exist. The only air this place has is what's displaced by the Fiend of Darkness. Nick landed on the ground and touched it. Fascinating, he thought. This is material treated with Zephyx, but it seems very natural, like it's just naturally absorbed Zephyx. I'd assume that's what he's doing, Nick thought, looking into the distance. Naturally, Nick also saw the owner of the place. The rotting corpse. The nightmare. Chapter 723. The nightmare was in the middle of this space. At least, Nick assumed it was the middle. This space was sizable, and he hadn't been able to sense the end of it. What he could see was a big area of pure Zephyx, and in the middle of it was the nightmare. Nick's perception stretched toward the nightmare and encompassed it. The last time he'd been here, he hadn't been able to sense much. He'd only been human back then, and nowhere near as educated as he was now. With his new perception, he could tell a lot of Zephyx was moving through the air, not just what the nightmare produced, but what it used. In fact, the movement was highly strange. It's the opposite of what I assumed, Nick thought. In his perception, it looked like a huge stream of energy came out of the ground before entering the corpse. Then an even bigger stream came out of the corpse and dissipated throughout the area. Nick approached the nightmare and looked at it. It hadn't changed a single bit. It was alone in eternal darkness. It had no perception. It didn't seem to have any will. It just existed. In a way, it looked sad and tragic. After a while, Nick looked at the space around it. It's crazy, actually, he thought, eyeing the tons of Zephyx beneath him. It didn't produce the Zephyx on the ground. This isn't its product, it's its fuel. The Zephyx beneath the nightmare is being absorbed by it, burned as fuel for its ability. You can't use an ability without spending something. Even my primary ability isn't an exception. I'm just recovering far more Zephyx than I use. Usually, Eternals use their abilities by drawing on their personal storage of Zephyx inside their Specter core. But that's not the case here. The nightmare is using the Zephyx below it as fuel, burning it to cause suffering across the world, which in turn produces a multitude of Zephyx for it to burn again. Then that Zephyx gets dumped into the atmosphere around it. Yet it's nowhere to be seen. It just vanishes. This isn't the first time I've seen something like this. Nick remembered the force Specter trap inside the outer wall of the biological machine. Back then, the Zephyx he'd used had also been absorbed by the surroundings. Is the same thing happening here? Nick thought, looking up again. Very possible. I should take a look later. Then he looked at the nightmare again. I might have been right in my earlier assumption. I believed it didn't seem alive or conscious, and that actually seems to be the case. It could use its own Zephyx for its ability, but it isn't. The only reason I can think of is that it has no passive Zephyx generation, which means it's dead. Nick kneeled beside the corpse and looked into its empty eye sockets. There was nothing there. It was like the nightmare was a random piece of stone. No intelligence, no life. Nick's left hand extended, and he put it on the nightmare's forehead. His ability didn't deactivate. His hand felt cold when it touched the nightmare, like touching a corpse. Except this corpse is rather sturdy, Nick thought. The nightmare looked fragile, like a strong gust of wind could collapse its crumbly bones. Yet when Nick touched it, he felt like he was touching an impossibly dense, heavy piece of iron. It felt about as hard as rank 7 material, which was crazy. A shield would need to unleash their most powerful attack just to scratch or dent something like that. After weighing everything he'd gathered so far, Nick came to a conclusion. This is most likely not a Specter, he thought. Nick's eyes narrowed. He remembered his conversation with the old champion of light. When Nick had told him about the nightmare, the champion had seemed to realize something. He'd said it made sense. Nick had also mentioned that the old champion of light seemed similar to the nightmare. Back then, Nick hadn't been sure why. Now he knew. It's because they are similar. Nick looked at the nightmare and carefully moved its rotting hair back. Everything made sense now. The nightmare had only appeared after the era of the enlightened ones. It was dead. It didn't use its own Zephyx. It felt like a human. That's because it is human, or at least it used to be. Nick imagined the scene. Several level 9 extractors shooting out of the ground simultaneously, all launching their strongest attack at the same point in the sky. A crack appeared in the sky, mended immediately after. The sun brightened and all the powerful extractors turned into dust, except for their leader, the most powerful human in the world. Instead of turning to dust, the leader was surrounded by darkness. Powers infiltrated him and changed him. His mind and soul were deleted. His Zephyx synchronizer was forcefully changed. His being had been hollowed out. The sun had turned him into a biological machine, its only purpose to cause as much suffering as possible to humanity. The most powerful human, the champion of an entire era, had been turned into a machine that inflicted endless pain on the very thing he used to protect. The nightmare wasn't humanity's enemy. It was a corpse transformed into an instrument of torture. Must have come incredibly close to succeeding, Nick thought, looking at the corpse. Transforming a corpse into a machine like this is definitely not the most efficient method. The only explanation I can think of is rage and fear. Most likely, the sun had a near-death experience, and when it realized it survived, it grew enraged and did this. Specters usually don't have emotions, but the sun might be different. It's obvious it's different from every other specter. It's very possible it has emotions. It's also possible it isn't even a specter to begin with. Nick wanted to sigh. I don't know enough about the sun yet. I can tell it's intelligent. Creating all these biological machines requires unrivaled intellect and education. No mindless object could create something this complicated. I can practically feel the hatred and anger that went into this bastardization of someone's ideals. Nick slowly stood up. I hope there is no afterlife. I hope you didn't need to see yourself like this. Nick had grown a bit emotional over the last couple of minutes, and he did his best to calm down and return to his investigation. A moment later, he turned to Mist and entered the nightmare's body. Usually Nick couldn't just enter someone's body. Every living being had a force of life in them, a soul, a mind, a will, whatever one called it. Entering someone's body meant losing control over one's Zephyx, unless someone forced their way in like the Sea King. But since the nightmare was dead and had no such will, Nick could enter its body freely. The actual corpse was just that, a corpse. The machine was just its Zephyx synchronizer. Over the years, the corpse had accumulated countless tiny holes Nick could navigate through. He followed the flow of Zephyx and found his goal quickly. In front of him was a spinning sphere, although it wasn't truly a sphere. It wasn't easy to tell at that speed, but Nick believed it was a dodecahedron. One of its sides was hollowed out, creating a hole through which he could see its center, the shape of a Zephyx synchronizer. But that wasn't everything. Around the dodecahedron were infinitely precise, clear membranes. Seeing them, Nick was reminded of the clear membranes that made the biological machine move. There's a crazy amount of Zephyx moving through these membranes, he thought. It's leaving the membranes and entering the dodecahedron, which is shaping it through Zephyx manipulation, creating the nightmare's ability. Nick didn't know a lot about the enlightened ones, but he knew plenty about Zephyx manipulation, Specter cores, and Zephyx synchronizers. The Zephyx synchronizer at its core confirms the corpse used to be human. The clear membranes are the machine the sun added. And I believe the dodecahedron is something the enlightened ones use to grow stronger. We use shells and other things, while they use this. This is the true essence of the nightmare. A biological machine forcefully activating the ability of possibly the most powerful human who ever lived to torture and harvest humanity. Chapter 724. Nick looked at the machine inside the corpse for a while. It was a fusion of three things. First, the natural Zephyx synchronizer. Second, the man-made addition improving it. Third, the abnormal alien architecture forcing it to activate. In a way, this represented the corpse's past, present, and future, being born a normal human, becoming an extremely powerful one, and turning into a soulless machine. After looking at the machine for a while, Nick carefully moved forward and touched the membrane. As long as he didn't interfere with its function, nothing should happen. When he touched it, he felt quite some resistance, though not nearly as strong as he'd anticipated. The membrane isn't nearly as hard as the corpse, Nick thought, pulling his mist tentacles back. If I wanted to, I could destroy it and essentially kill the nightmare. That was a lot to digest. He could technically destroy one of the Eternals. Besides the sun, the nightmare had probably caused the most suffering of all of them. The simple fact that no human was allowed to enter the dark already caused immense suffering, and almost every human had accidentally wandered into it at least once in their life. Usually, the first few times weren't that bad. If someone was only a bit in the dark, the nightmare just whispered into their mind and played a couple of tricks. But if someone kept wandering back in, the real torture began. It was so bad that over 50% of all humans were scared of even looking at a dark place. With a single strike, Nick could end all of it. The machine would be destroyed, the Zephyx synchronizer would stop spinning, and within seconds it would turn to pure Zephyx and scatter. Sure, the sun's technological prowess was beyond impressive, but without a proper base material like this synchronizer, it couldn't easily build a replacement that did the same thing. There might be cheaper ways to get similar results, but not the exact same one. If I destroy the nightmare right here, I'll have redeemed myself several times over. Millions upon millions of humans would have their lives improved tremendously. Nick wanted to take a deep breath. But it's not that simple. Honestly, back when I first joined Aegis, things seemed much simpler. Just become strong enough to deal with the Eternals, kill one after the other, and the issue is solved. If only. Instead, if I kill the nightmare right now, the sun will realize humanity has become powerful enough to kill an eternal. It'll immediately raise the suppression factor while probably killing almost all of the shields. Then it'll just build a different machine to do something similar, maybe worse. Maybe something that forces humans to stay in literal sunlight, giving Specter light no chance to fight it. It might even dim its own light to make it harder to refract into distant caves without losing too much of it. Nick looked at the nightmare. Killing it would be an escalation. Humanity isn't ready to fight the sun yet. Nick materialized beside the nightmare and looked at it a bit longer. I have to be careful what I tell the technician. Some of this is definitely subject to the sun's surveillance. If we're ever ready to fight the sun, I can kill the nightmare with no issues. Until then, we can make use of it. As long as I'm here to help the extractors, I can lead them to the safe area around it, and they can become attuned to it. Though I'm not sure how safe that really is. There are bound to be specters who know the truth about the sun. Some might even work directly under it. If there are any, Death will definitely be one of them. If Death realizes we can attune an extractor to the nightmare, it might tell the sun, and that would be the death of humanity's chance at freedom. If it's only one or two very powerful extractors who manage to attune, Death might not even notice, since it would look like a mutation of an existing ability. But if many weaker extractors start showing clear signs of the nightmare's influence, things get troublesome. We definitely can't let new extractors attune to it, and even if we wanted to, I doubt I could protect normal people from its influence here. It's unreasonably dense and powerful around this place. I don't even know how I managed to get here the first time. Nick looked away from the nightmare and turned in a random direction. I should find out where I actually am. A moment later, he turned to mist and flew forward. As he moved away from the nightmare, he felt the density of prefix around him drop, and he could tell what was happening to it. It's all being pulled to the nightmare. Just like everything else, it isn't exempt from needing something to produce something. Without prefix, it can't produce Zephyx. All the prefix in the atmosphere is being pulled toward it, creating a dense cloud around it. Yet the density in the outer area of its domain is surprisingly low, several times lower than outside. That means only a limited amount of prefix is being released into this place. If it were connected to the outside world, the density here should at least be comparable to normal. This means we're in an isolated space that only gets access to so much prefix, which means something dictates how much we receive here. Nick already had an idea what that could be. After a bit more flying, he found a huge wall riddled with countless tiny holes. He closed his eyes and focused on the atmosphere. Some of the holes deliver Zephyx, while others deliver prefix. When Nick had been in the small holes of the green wall, he hadn't been able to tell where the Zephyx was going, thanks to the distortion of his perception. But here, there was no distorting effect. There was no reason for one. This was probably the core of one of the most secure and fortified places in the world, and there was no point defending it any further than that. It would be like adding a thick bone shell inside one's own heart. If I follow one of the holes delivering Zephyx, I'll most likely end up in some gigantic storage, probably kilometers upon kilometers of it. And if I'm right, I'll find another prefix generator down one of the other holes. As expected, this is probably a closed shell system. None of its components interact with the outside world, except for the star energy being transported to the biological machine. Which means I probably wouldn't be able to get out safely without the Fiend of Darkness. Seems like I was a bit reckless. Luckily, it worked out. I should be more careful in the future, but mistakes happen. I'm also just human. Nick wasn't sure if he meant that as a joke or not. Maybe I shouldn't be so flat all the time. He shook his head. Tangent, I should focus on investigating more. Nick shrunk and squeezed into one of the holes delivering prefix. As he flew through it, his perception stayed almost completely unaffected. Sure enough, there were no defensive measures here beyond the material's hardness. He rapidly flew through and exited on the other side. As expected, Nick thought, looking at the gigantic biological machine, very similar to the other one. Chitin-like substance covered everything, pushed around by transparent membranes and muscles, and the density of prefix was higher than normal. While I'm already here, I should take another look at the actual sun. Maybe with more context I'll learn something new. Nick flew through the machine toward the top, but after just a couple of seconds he stopped. The machine was extremely loud and chaotic, but to Nick, it sounded like many individual logical vibrations. There was a pattern to them and they made sense. Just now, though, he'd heard something that didn't fit, like someone dropping a plate in the middle of a song. A very different sound. Nick changed direction and moved toward it. After just a bit he saw the source, and his eyes went wide with shock. What is that? Is that a specter? Chapter 725. Some meters away, Nick saw a being doing something to the biological machine. It couldn't be described as bipedal or quadrupedal. It walked on several tentacles of different lengths and widths. The tentacles didn't feel like those of a squid or octopus, though. They looked clear, reminding Nick of the machine's own membranes. If he had to compare their appearance and material to an animal, he'd pick a weird insect. The being was almost bereft of symmetry, tentacles of different lengths sprouting from seemingly random places. The thickest were as thick as a human thigh, the thinnest a bit slimmer than an average pinky. Nick counted 17 in all, though he couldn't be sure he'd found every one. As for the actual body of the being, there wasn't really one to speak of. The tentacles all ended in a single knot with a couple of basic sets of perceptive organs, small antennae with fine hairs, small holes that could make sense of sound and light, and organs that seemed to measure things Nick couldn't immediately discern. Most of the sensory organs sat on the thickest, longest tentacles, giving the being a unique ability to surveil its surroundings at all times. Right now, the tentacle thing had several tentacles plugged into a bank of holes in the biological machine. Occasionally, some of the machine's noises stopped as new ones appeared. It's tinkering with the machine, Nick thought, performing maintenance it looks like. That alone was surprising, but something else was more surprising still. I can't feel any danger coming from this thing. I also can't sense any Zephyx from it, and every Specter gives off some Zephyx, even minions. Either it's extremely powerful and good at hiding from my Zephyx sense, or it simply doesn't use Zephyx at all. And the fact that I'm not feeling any danger matters too. If this were something made of star energy or pure energy, I'd feel it. But as far as I can tell, this thing is just purely biological and autonomous. Even the biological machine has an obvious source of power, while this thing seems to be biochemical, like an animal, a human, or a plant. Yet it shows extremely advanced knowledge, performing maintenance on something this complicated. Nick's mind raced as he realized what that meant. This is just a skilled engineer from a vastly more advanced civilization. It's not a fighter, it's essentially just a normal guy with a good education. But it's not human. All the clues Nick had gathered over his lifetime fused into one picture. His ability had never been triggered by the sunlight, suggesting the sun either couldn't sense him or wasn't bothered by it. Impossibly advanced technology that could produce prefix from something that wasn't Zephyx. The separate circle on the warning sign he'd found on his first visit to the ruins of the Ancient Ones. This whole time, I was trying to fit two images together that just didn't make sense combined. The sun doesn't really do anything and can't sense me, suggesting a lack of consciousness and intelligence. But the construction of machinery this advanced, on the level of the Ancient Ones, suggests that whoever controls the world has to be incomprehensibly intelligent and educated. I just couldn't fit those two things together. One made the other impossible. How could the sun be that unmoving and still while constructing and maintaining machines like these? How would it even do that without light inside the areas holding the biological machines? The sun's got to see something to do something, right? Everything finally clicked. Another civilization, one that isn't human, literal aliens. A completely alien civilization would explain the absurd difference in how the machinery was built. We don't use biological machines because, why the fuck would we? That's dumb. Naming all the problems with the concept could fill a book. But with access to something like star energy or Zephyx, plus sophisticated gene editing technology, it at least becomes feasible. With star energy or Zephyx, you can create biological matter on the level of an extractor's body. It would heal extremely quickly and could be maintained on very little energy. An entire adult human body can run for a full day on the energy equivalent of heating 50 liters of water by 50 degrees Celsius, while tempering materials with Zephyx is a lot more costly. Though humanity has advanced so far in non-biological engineering that starting from scratch isn't worth it, non-biological matter has its own advantages, like not needing a constant stream of new energy to keep existing. I'm getting sidetracked. The important part is that this technology can't be human in nature. It's opposed to the very foundation of human engineering, which means it had to have been created somewhere without humans, and there were billions of humans all over the world during the era of the Ancient Ones. I can't think of anywhere but another planet. Nick thought back to the diagram he'd seen in the ruins of the Ancient Ones, a big circle in the middle representing Earth, surrounded by a bigger circle representing the Sun, and then a smaller circle some distance from the other two. He'd since learned enough about the Ancient One's world to know what that smaller circle was. The moon, a natural satellite orbiting Earth from quite a distance. He remembered how the warning sign had specifically highlighted it. That ruin was military in nature, and the only reason I can imagine it flagging the moon with such urgency is enemy presence. Most likely, the aliens have a base on the moon, running their little experiment from there. More and more pieces fit together. When I compared the sun to a glass bottle, I was closer than I thought. It's literally that, a very sophisticated, advanced bottle. The sun probably isn't even really a Specter. It's probably just another fancy machine. It's like a fucking smart aquarium, keeps the water warm, oxygenated, cleans everything, gets rid of pests. Except in our case, it creates a dense atmosphere of profix, surveils humanity, and creates specters that manufacture human suffering into Zephyx. This also explains how the Ancient Ones lost with such insanely powerful weapons. There was probably a war between them and the aliens. The humans lost, and the aliens came to Earth. Instead of eradicating or subjugating us, they made a glorified recycling center out of our planet. Dump shit in, take gold out. You can't just transform something with low energy content into something with high energy content. You have to make up the difference somehow. It sounds absurd, but what if suffering is some kind of cost? That's ridiculous, but it might somehow work. Our understanding of reality is always evolving. We might not notice it happening since it's so slow, but over hundreds or thousands of years, it's evident. What if our feelings actually have some effect on physics? Nick had to fight down the embarrassment of even thinking that, since it flew against accepted fundamentals of physics. I don't have another explanation, okay, he thought in annoyance, as if defending the idea against an imaginary crowd already sneering at him. The fact is, Zephyx gets created when specters inflict suffering on humans. We don't know how it works, but we know that it does, and we can't argue with the fact. Nick looked at the alien tinkering with the machine, his true enemy. The sun was only a weapon, a tool. Most likely, some powerful specters know about the aliens and report to them. Maybe even the champion reports to them directly. They probably offered him a long, prosperous life at the peak of humanity in exchange for his services. Among millions of humans, you're bound to find at least a couple thousand who take that trade. We're just farm animals. All of humanity just farm animals, eating shit so we can shit out gold. Nick looked at the alien with hatred. He really wanted to kill it. Sadly, he knew he couldn't. Chapter 726. Nick really wanted to kill this thing. It was someone working for the suppressors of humanity, yet he couldn't. Well, he could, but going through with it wouldn't be close to worth it. At least I know now what I'm dealing with, Nick thought. And most likely, the other shields know about this too. The old champion used an opportunity to tell them about humanity's true enemy, but they couldn't tell anyone else, since only the champion had the ability to protect them from surveillance. Nick was reminded of the speed of information, which implied that information was itself an actual physical thing, and physical things could be measured. All the shields knew the truth of the world, but they couldn't talk about it. It was forbidden information. Sounds a bit like the null, Nick thought. It kills anyone who knows anything about it, which means it can sense the presence of that information. Although, what if that's not completely true? It's also possible the null can only sense when information is being shared. But then Nick remembered he could sense when anyone was perceiving him, which was very similar to someone knowing something about him without sharing it with anyone else. Or I'm just wrong, and the null can sense anyone who knows anything about it. Either way, it's possible the null is some kind of information sensor. The sun can only sense things in its light. Plenty of evidence points to that. So how would it even know if information was shared in the dark? Yet the null could. That would give it purpose in the grand scheme of this colossal recycling center that is Earth. The sun is the wall of the prison, keeping the environment just how the aliens want it. The moss stops the animals, the food, from becoming too powerful to damage the prison. The nightmare harvests a ton of Zephyx and forces the animals to stay out in the open where the sun can see them. The null surveils the information inside the prison, making sure no animal learns anything that could compromise it. And Nurse Alice? I'm not sure, actually. Maybe she's just there to remind everyone that the Specters are in charge. Or maybe she's just harvesting Zephyx too. I can't be sure about her purpose, but the other four all make sense. All the Eternals are most likely servants of the aliens. Which brings up the question, how powerful are the aliens actually? Nick looked at the specimen working on the machine. This one's a weak one, but the difference between normal humans and shields is immense too. The aliens were powerful enough to beat the Ancient Ones in a war, and the Ancient Ones had weapons that could destroy entire planets. Would destroying the sun even help humanity? What if extremely powerful aliens just arrive and eradicate all the powerful humans again? That might even have happened during the era of the Enlightened Ones. What if they actually managed to break the sun, but enforcers arrived to crush the revolution? Nick grew more and more anxious. This train of thought led to dark places. Then wouldn't everything be pointless anyway? If that's truly the case, there's no way to escape any of this. And even if the aliens don't have someone strong enough to kill the strongest humans, they'll just destroy the planet outright. The Ancient Ones could destroy planets, and they still lost to the aliens, which means the aliens can probably do the same. Nick couldn't see a way out. Destroying the sun was already hard enough. Now even that felt pointless. There was no way out. What could they possibly do? How could you fight something that could destroy planets from millions of kilometers away? It was crazy. Problems upon problems. No matter how much he thought about it, Nick couldn't find a solution. For a long while, he just kept turning over some possible plan to deal with the aliens and their insanely advanced technology. Plop. At some point, the alien pulled its tentacle out of the machine, and Nick was pulled from his thoughts. The alien calmly tapped on something along one of its tentacles. Ding! A platform appeared beneath it, a barrier formed around it, and the platform started to hover, then flew upward. Nick focused on the alien and followed. After flying up for a bit, the alien reached the top of the machine. Just like the last one, there was no prefix above it. Instead, a portal through which Nick could see the actual sun. Like last time, he felt like he was drowning, but this time he knew what the force was. Nick had no sense that could detect star energy directly, but he could tell it was here by the pain and panic he felt. He watched as the alien's platform flew through the portal, repositioning himself to follow as long as he could. Sure enough, at the very edge of the portal, he caught sight of the top of another machine. The alien's platform docked with it, and seconds later, the machine began to move. A small spaceship, Nick thought, watching it speed away. He looked at it for a moment longer before fleeing back into the machine. Staying out there was extremely damaging to him. Space seems just as deadly to Specters as it is to humans. Now Nick was alone in the room with the machine again. He waited, turning over everything he'd just learned. I don't know. What am I supposed to do against that? What can I possibly do? When the sun gets destroyed, all the Specters will vanish and I'll die. At that point, the aliens will send enforcers to kill all the strong humans and suppress humanity again, and I won't even be able to help since I'll already be dead. And even if humanity somehow gets strong enough to fight the aliens directly, they'll just launch some kind of planetary annihilation beam and kill everything here. Sure, experts can survive in a vacuum, and heroes can fly and even move through space, but what's the point of that when every other human dies? A single human can't live forever, and a couple hundred heroes might not be enough to repopulate humanity. And without a planet, how would newborn humans even survive? Children need ground, air, water, food. Maybe the aliens are even powerful enough to make the actual sun explode, in which case everything gets destroyed, shields included. What the fuck are we supposed to do? Nick just didn't know. The most effective way to hurt the aliens might be to just collectively kill ourselves right now, but what's even the point of that? We want freedom. We want to survive. We want agency. The aliens are our enemies, but hurting them doesn't necessarily mean we benefit. His thoughts had spiraled into negativity from the sheer hopelessness of it. How would I do that? How do you stop an impossibly powerful fortress with impossibly powerful guards and impossibly powerful weapons? Nick didn't know. While he'd been lost in thought, he had already made his way out of the biological machine and back to the room containing the nightmare. Still thinking, he absent-mindedly looked at one of the holes siphoning Zephyx out of the room. It should lead to some gigantic storage filled with it. Might as well take a look while I'm here. I don't know what that'll change, but it beats doing nothing. For a moment, he missed his ability to sigh. Nick entered one of the holes and followed it. After a while, the holes merged into one big passage, and he could see white crystals of Zephyx materializing around him as they flowed forward. Different gases were being added along the way, and as the Zephyx passed through them, it hardened and stabilized. Clink, clink, clink. Then he reached the end of the tunnel, where all the crystals fell out onto a conveyor belt. With all their advancements, they still use conveyor belts, Nick thought, except these are just moving plates of chitin. His mind was still turning over ways to deal with the aliens when he saw what waited at the end of the belt. He hadn't left the hole, but he could still see it. A delivery vehicle, he thought, looking at a larger version of the spacecraft the engineer alien had used to leave. And with that, a small hope appeared in Nick's mind. If I could follow one of these, I should end up at the local stronghold of the aliens. I could learn more about them, maybe even find a way to stop them. Dealing with an impossibly powerful stronghold. How does infiltration and sabotage sound? Chapter 727. Nick's mind raced with possibilities as he watched the delivery ship from one of the tunnels. From time to time, he saw a couple of aliens walking around the vehicle, inspecting the cargo. Their behavior looked surprisingly human. One could almost imagine they were just very strange humans. The aliens most likely have a base on the moon with everything they'd need to handle any situation that might crop up on Earth. I don't think their home planet is anywhere close to Earth, and I'm not sure how fast they can travel through space. Lightspeed is the fastest matter and energy can go, but that's only a rule based on our current understanding of physics. You might not be able to go faster than light, but if you can manipulate space, things might be different. I can create maws that let me move instantaneously. They're like portals. If you could connect space through portals, you could technically move faster than light. Most likely the aliens have some kind of portal technology, but I can't be sure how it works. Can they make portals anywhere? Do they need an anchor point? Are portals movable? Do they need a big machine? I'd guess the base on the moon has one of these portals, assuming they can't just create them wherever they want. Nick tried to imagine what kind of base he'd build on the moon if he were the aliens' leader. There should be a bunch of engineers keeping the machines running, including the sun itself. The aliens might be unimaginably advanced, but something of this scale can't be easy to manage. Then there should be plenty of logistics infrastructure. Earth is a huge factory for them, and they're selling the Zephyx the nightmare creates. I assumed the Zephyx was only harvested when an era ends, but that's obviously not the case. It'd be weird to deliver goods only once every couple thousand years. There might even be a mining town, with plenty of manpower on the moon, and if the aliens are anything like humans, they'd want their mates or children close by, shops, hotels, a hospital, and so on, plus a larger administrative group to run all of it. There should also be a power plant using the generated Zephyx to power everything. Lastly, there are the defenses. Most likely a sizable troop of powerful soldiers in case humanity breaks out again. I don't know how powerful the aliens are, but I'd guess something like 5 level 10 people on standby. And finally, there has to be a weapon as an ultimate failsafe, something that can destroy Earth if necessary. In terms of sheer power, the portal, if there is one, should rank highest. It connects this group of aliens to their whole civilization. Without it, they're alone out here. Then comes the planet-destroying weapon. Deal with that, and humanity has a real chance to fight. Lastly, the guards. Beat them and we can deal with the aliens themselves. If all of this works out, we should have several years to prepare. Maybe we could even learn to colonize. Nick paused. Colonize? Most likely, the Ancient Ones managed to colonize other planets, right? The reason we have no technology from the Ancient Ones here is that everything on Earth was destroyed. But would that be true on other planets they'd reached? What's the point of destroying technology somewhere humanity has no access to? Wouldn't you rather keep it intact to study? We might not learn to reproduce it, but there must be a way to at least use it. If we could use the Ancient Ones' technology, we might become even more powerful than they were. After all, they never had extractors. The more Nick planned, the less hopeless things felt. There was still some hope left. Is this what the old champion had in mind? Nick thought, remembering his words. The Null is the ultimate Specter when it comes to staying hidden. We can't win against the aliens in open conflict, only through subterfuge, guerrilla tactics, infiltration, espionage, sabotage. Isn't that exactly what the Null's power is best at? I might actually be the only one with a real chance at freeing humanity. Nick wanted to take a deep breath. But I'm not even close to ready. With my current power, I can't even fight the corruptors, who can be killed by the trio of destruction, who can be killed by death, who can be killed by the Eternals, who can be killed by the sun, who can be killed by the aliens. I need at least the power of a shield before even thinking about infiltrating the enemy base, and even then, I probably won't be strong enough to do real damage. The aliens only seem to get nervous around level 9 extractors. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe level 10 beings aren't common enough to just station near a random Zephyx mine. So my first priority is my own power. But I also can't forget about humanity. We need researchers who can build weapons capable of fighting the aliens, and we need an intelligence network. I can't be everywhere at once. If humanity wants to survive, it needs to stand on its own 2 feet. So my second priority is dealing with most of the Specters that keep us suppressed. The Maw keeps humanity's strength weak. The envious researcher keeps its technology weak. Death and the trio of destruction aren't actually our biggest concern. The other two are far worse. The Maw's death would cause a massive stir among the aliens, but the envious researcher's death shouldn't be as bad. They're probably far more worried about level 9 or 10 extractors than a few fancy weapons. One extractor can grow insanely powerful in a relatively short time, while technology takes much longer to advance. As long as they don't see level 9 extractors, they're probably not resetting the era. They might not even want to reset it at all. I've been talking about it like it's their first option, when it's probably their last. Killing all of humanity means centuries of extremely weak production while it claws back up from infancy. The aliens might even protect humanity from the Specters during that time. Resetting means trading profit for loss for a couple of centuries. They killed the ancient ones because they had to. They'd grown far too powerful. They probably killed the recovering ones because the suppression factor was too high and humanity wasn't developing fast enough to stay profitable, essentially a restart after a faulty boot-up. The enlightened ones had to die because they were a genuine threat. The suffering ones died for the same reason as the recovering ones, just not profitable. Right now, the aliens seem to have hit their sweet spot. We're already a lot more powerful than the recovering ones or the suffering ones, but nowhere near as dangerous as the enlightened ones. They might even want to keep this era going forever, as long as nothing slaps them in the face. Time is actually on our side, and if we use time to our advantage. Nick was reminded of a popular card game among the gangs back in the Dregs, one that involved a lot of bluffing and betting. Veterans of the game had a favorite tactic, placing small bets at every interval, so the opponent kept betting along, since it wasn't a big investment on the off chance they had a good hand. But by the third round, the opponent would realize they were already too far in to quit, and kept betting anyway. Nick knew that fallacy well, sunk cost fallacy. He'd been a victim of it himself. If we very slowly increase humanity's power, we might have a chance. A suppressed adversary, the aliens probably wouldn't see that as a problem, not from as far ahead as they are. The envious researcher dies fine too. Humanity won't build weapons strong enough to break the sun within the next millennium. A level 9 extractor appears problematic but expected. We've watched them advance slowly, and we can handle it, plus it boosts production. And then bang, their portals collapse, their weapons are destroyed. 3 or 4 more level 9 extractors show up, and suddenly everyone's fighting the soldiers. Soon we'll get access to the enlightened one's technology, and once the envious researcher is gone, our own technology will leap forward at terrifying speed. But we have to keep it secret. And I know exactly how. Little do the aliens realize that the great sensor they built to keep humanity in their sight casts a long, dark shadow of its own. Chapter 728. Nick's plan had taken form, but it was a long, complex one that probably needed centuries to complete, maybe even millennia. Well, Specters don't suffer from longevity issues. As long as I can keep surviving and secretly working with humanity, we'll never lose our goals. As a Specter, I also won't attract attention if I become an adversary. I might even be able to become an Eternal if I can sell myself well enough to the aliens. At that moment, Nick had a crazy thought. One of the 5 Eternals hadn't fit into the greater scheme of things before. Nurse Alice, Nick thought, it can't be right. She didn't really contribute to the Zephyx mind's safety. She was also very human-like. Nick had once been human himself, and he'd managed to become a Specter. What if Nurse Alice was doing the same thing? It was crazy, but it wasn't impossible. Asking her is way too risky. She could be an agent working for the aliens, something like a supervisor. The way she operates, visiting every city almost daily, she could be an extra layer of insurance. I can't ask her before I'm powerful enough to resist her. If she finds out about humanity's plan, I need to be strong enough to kill her. Nick wanted to take a deep breath, but alas, he had no lungs. One thing at a time. All of that is too far in the future. First order of business, get access to the technology of the enlightened ones. Nick threw one last glance at the aliens in the delivery ship, then turned and left. Today, he'd been confronted with humanity's true enemy and its true standing. The enemy's power was overwhelming, but there was still a sliver of hope. Nick entered the room with the nightmare again, and his gaze landed on the corpse. You're causing unimaginable suffering to humanity. Nick narrowed his eyes. But you might also be the very thing that saves us. Nick landed beside the corpse and, pointless as it was, followed an urge, bowing in deep respect for a couple of seconds. The former owner of this body had sacrificed his life for humanity, putting it above his own. This was exactly who Nick aspired to be. After the bow, he flew off again and found the Fiend of Darkness without much trouble. It stopped for him, and he flew inside. A moment later, he materialized back in its containment unit. Nick was back in Crimson City. He'd already reactivated his barrier and put his disguise back on. From an outsider's perspective, not even an hour had passed, and presumably not much had changed. And yet, this had been the most enlightening hour of his life. The enemy, his purpose, his goal, his plan, everything had become clear. Nick knew what he had to do. "I will leave now, but I will return in the future," Nick transmitted to the Fiend of Darkness. It only answered with a confused feeling. Nick's ideas were far too complex for it. "I go now," Nick transmitted instead. That the Fiend of Darkness understood, and it just acknowledged the thought. Nick stepped out of the containment unit and was greeted by an expert wearing the city's uniform. "Welcome back, sir," the expert said respectfully. "Tell Vanessa that I am back and that I'm finished with the Fiend of Darkness for now. Also tell the governor to meet me outside the building," Nick ordered. "Right away," the guard answered and left. Nick walked toward the entrance, where the governor was already waiting. "Everything to your satisfaction, Special Agent?" the governor asked with formal politeness. "My research has concluded for now," Nick said. "Crimson City has shown full cooperation, and I'll forward everything I've seen today to my superior. Expect an answer and some orders within the following days." William seemed pleased by that and nodded. "I look forward to the orders. Will you be leaving now, Special Agent?" Nick nodded. "My business in Crimson City has concluded," he said, hovering on a bit of mist beneath his feet. "I wish you a good day, Governor." "I wish you a good day and good luck in your future endeavors, Special Agent," William answered. The two of them flew out of the megastructure together. The governor waited outside while Nick flew toward the horizon. Once he was sure Nick had left, William's polite smile vanished, and he snorted in annoyance. He knew Nick's kind. Puritans, people with naive ideologies. In this world, you needed to be flexible to know how to work with other people in power. Those who forced their will down everyone's throat didn't last long here. There was always taking and giving among the powerful, receive and reciprocate. The governor turned and went back into the megastructure, unaware that Nick was still watching him. As soon as his ability reactivated, Nick had turned to mist and snuck back into the city. Even with his grand plan for saving humanity now taking shape, Nick wouldn't forget the weak and helpless along the way. When he was young, he had suffered because Aegis only ever looked upward at the powerful enemy in the sky. He knew he couldn't dedicate his life to fixing every city, but where he had the opportunity, he wouldn't refuse it. The first thing Nick did after returning to the city was enter one of the houses in the outer ring. He went into the walls and studied the device inside for a good while. He knew a lot about zephology, and he wanted to understand exactly how it worked. A couple of hours later, he'd learned everything he could just by observing it from the outside. Next, he spent some time hunting down a suitably vile criminal living in the outer ring. Finding depravity in such a miserable place wasn't hard. One robbery later, he had his target. He followed the robber home. Luckily, the man was a bachelor, which made things easier. Nick went into the wall of the house and slowly took the machine apart. He couldn't learn how the whole thing worked without doing that, but he didn't want to doom some innocent person to a cruel death in the process. The machine no longer worked, of course, but that didn't bother him. After experimenting on it for a couple of hours, Nick understood exactly how it functioned. It wasn't complicated, and building it wasn't expensive either. A bit later, Nick returned to the megastructure and tracked down the people involved in selling the product. He was extremely experienced at gathering information. He'd been doing it for literal decades. Eventually, he found his targets, the company's owners, its executives, and a few people tangled up in illegal dealings with corrupt officials. About 10 people in all. Next, Nick conjured a small booklet explaining the machine's principle in plain, understandable terms. The first page alone was enough to grasp the general gist of how it worked. He infiltrated each of their offices and left a booklet behind in every one, then waited near whoever looked at it first. That person scratched his head at the booklet on his desk and opened it, assuming it was some kind of report. After reading a few pages, he realized it was probably how their machine worked and shrugged. He was just a normal person. He didn't know about the envious researcher, so he felt no fear reading through it. He simply assumed some researcher had lost the booklet, someone had found it, and it had been returned to his office. Nick followed him for a couple of hours, and then, finally, it happened. The first sign was that Nick's ability deactivated, despite him being as stealthy as possible. The envious researcher had noticed him, but Nick was just a random Specter in a random city. It didn't care. Bang! The man's head exploded, revealing a hovering brain. Within less than a tenth of a second, the brain vanished into thin air, and so did the booklet. Nick hadn't seen so much as a trace of the envious researcher while any of it happened. Within 3 seconds, every booklet had been taken, and everyone who knew anything about the technology was dead. Within 5, every device in the outer ring was destroyed. And that was it. The envious researcher had appeared and disappeared. The normal people noticed nothing, but the city's elite very quickly realized something horrifying had just happened. Chapter 729. The people in the outer ring hadn't realized that the devices protecting them had been destroyed. They continued as always, working their asses off. Nick decided to stay in Crimson City a while longer to watch how things developed. While the outer ring noticed nothing, the elite immediately fell into an uproar. Several families had lost a member. Executives from a couple of companies had been assassinated by something unknown, and they ran straight to the government for help. Naturally, the leaders already knew exactly what had happened. The envious researcher had attacked. It was a brutal shock to everyone. But the city's leaders weren't especially concerned about the dead executives. They were concerned about their research team. Almost every member had been killed. These were the people who developed barriers, containment units, weapons, and every other gadget that used Zephyx. Herman had been among them. He'd been CEO of Ghosty's lab and had worked under Nick as captain of the guard for years. Nick had even considered him something like a friend. Sadly, for the good of mankind, he couldn't put his feelings before results. Researchers were innocent in all of this, and Nick knew it. They just wanted to research and develop things. It wasn't their fault that a couple of rich people misappropriated their work. But they had also knowingly built this technology and chosen not to tell Aegis about it. Whenever major technology was created, it was supposed to be reported to Aegis so they could find a way to distribute it without triggering the envious researcher. Easier said than done. Over 90% of such technology was never distributed at all, since getting it past the envious researcher was such an enormous undertaking. And even when a technology was chosen, its developers might wait years or decades before it could be used safely. Not everyone was willing to accept that gamble for safety's sake. The envious researcher would have activated eventually regardless. It would have just taken a couple more years. It needed between 5 and 10 people to know of a technology before it triggered, and Nick believed only 2 to 4 had read his booklet before the Specter appeared. A few people had already worked out how the devices function. Over time, that number would have grown, and the envious researcher would have struck anyway. Nick had just accelerated the process. The researchers had certainly been reckless, but they weren't guilty of torturing the poor people in the outer ring. "I am willing to kill 10 innocent people to save 1,000, Nick thought, looking at the corpses of people he'd known a long time. We don't have the luxury of caring about individual fates when all of humanity is fighting for survival, and I can't spend years here micromanaging this without killing innocents somewhere along the way. What's right or wrong isn't important. Results are important." A day later, the leaders gathered to discuss the fallout. They still had access to all their previous technology, well documented, and not subject to the envious researcher, so they could keep following existing plans to build more containment units and barriers. But Crimson City's long-term technological growth had been crippled, and it would take a long time to train researchers who could work at a similar level again. The most prominent topic of the meeting was the outer ring. How should they handle it now? The leaders were split. Some argued they should simply keep the whole thing secret. The people in the outer ring wouldn't notice a difference, and sure, a few of them would die occasionally, but the city's profits wouldn't take a real hit. Others argued the opposite, that people would notice as more and more died to Specters, that they'd lose faith in the city's government, and might even abandon their houses to sleep in the streets of the outer city. At which point, they also wouldn't need to work as hard, since 80% of their expenses would vanish. The debate dragged on for over 2 hours, until someone finally spoke out of pure annoyance. "You know," Jorny said, arms crossed, "you might not like to hear it, but things were easier when the liaison was running things." Several people took offense, the governor most of all. "Stay on topic, Jornies," the governor said with a reprimanding tone. "What topic is there to discuss?" Jorny shot back. "We just talk in circles, this could happen, that could happen, profits here, profits there. Why can't we do things the way he did? I don't like him either, but I can't deny the city improved a lot under him." He turned to Vanessa. "Do you want to go back to the old days of Cujoblitz before the liaison took over?" Vanessa was more proper than Jorny's, not one to talk out of line, but her face showed annoyance at having to agree with him. Cujoblitz had been the most powerful manufacturer in the city, yet she'd felt like they'd reached the end of their rope. She'd wanted to become governor but couldn't with Marcus Julius in charge. She'd wanted to become an agent with no idea how to go about it. Nick had given them the chance to join Aegis early, as aides to the governor, freeing them from worrying about profits and rival manufacturers. That lasted until Arya left and William took over. Now it felt like the old days again. I do not support Jorny's sudden change in topic, but I believe there's relevant truth to his words, Vanessa said after a moment. The two of them glanced at Librin Baneling, Kugelblitz's last former hero. He just shrugged, signaling he had nothing to add. William wasn't happy about the subtle jab at his capabilities, but he kept himself under control. And what would the liaison do in this case? He asked, his tone strict. Just build a wall, Jorny said. The people of the Outer Ring are part of the city, and if we want a good city, we owe even the poorest people a minimum of safety and care. At least, that's probably how he'd phrase it. William wasn't fond of the idea. Governor, Vanessa said, drawing his attention. A couple of years before Arya left, she said something to me in anger, and her words made me pause because they hurt, but they also hit the truth. Forgive my language quoting this, she was quite annoyed. She cleared her throat. What's your problem? Why are you so against this? Why is it so fucking hard for you to be a good person for once? She said, imitating Arya's tone. William did not enjoy hearing that. It sounded naive, the words of a child who'd never had to run a business. Let's be decent people for once, Jorny said, leaning back in his chair. Vanessa and Librin nodded. William looked around at the other heroes in the room, newer ones, risen after Nick had left, who mostly deferred to Jorny's, Vanessa, and Librin as the veterans. They indicated only that they weren't against the proposal, not that they supported it outright. Fine, William said, unwilling. He didn't want to build another wall given the insane cost. It would cannibalize the city's savings. But he was a businessman and a politician, and it would be foolish to cross the most powerful people in his own circle. He needed their support. In the end, they decided to build a newer, taller wall around the outer ring, with plenty of extra space for future buildings. Might as well turn it into a long-term investment. That way, the issue wouldn't resurface for a while. Construction began shortly after, and Nick left. He didn't need to stay any longer. He'd only wanted to make sure things went the right way, and they had. He made his way back to Aegis headquarters, ready for a long conversation with the technician about everything he'd seen. Chapter 730. Nick arrived atop Aegis headquarters, and the guards greeted him with over-the-top respect. They didn't want another extension of their sentences. They practically licked his boots. Nick found that justified, not because he saw himself as some amazing savior, but because these corrupt guards were finally acting like the people they used to extort. Nick walked down to the research and development department, nodded to a couple of researchers, and entered the technician's area. Back already? The technician asked with a smile. Thought you'd take longer with that whole business in Crimson City. I didn't have to do much, Nick said. Seems like the leaders remembered Arya and me and did what I wanted. So the problem's solved. Nick nodded. Great, let's get to the interesting part then. What did you find? The technician asked, some excitement creeping in. A lot, Nick said, far more than I thought. Come on, tell me, stop being so dramatic. Well, Nick said, pausing, I'll have to establish a couple of things first. The technician's excitement dimmed, replaced by a flicker of nervousness. Was Nick about to say something that could get all of humanity killed? I know about the information problem, Nick said. I'll choose my words carefully. Trust that I know what I'm doing. I'll avoid saying things directly and lean on metaphors and hypotheticals. If you don't already know these things, you won't understand me. If you do, you'll know exactly what I mean. The technician wasn't happy anymore. If Nick made even a single misstep, all of humanity could be gone within the day. He took a deep breath. Well, all right, I'll trust you on this, he said, pressing the button that isolated his barrier. When it cleared again, Nick nodded. Nobody was watching. I know precisely why the old champion said it made sense to compare him to the nightmare. I've confirmed it. I can't say more than that, Nick said carefully. The technician couldn't be entirely sure what Nick meant. The champion had never gotten the chance to explain, since he'd already been too weak by the time Nick first appeared. But the technician had his own theories, and Nick's words gave a lot of credibility to one of them, that the nightmare used to be human. I think I understand, the technician said, releasing a breath. Would you say this is a sad topic? Nick nodded. It's filled with tragedy and irony. That confirmed it. The nightmare used to be a human. Ending the tragedy isn't difficult. I could end it myself, Nick said. The technician sucked in a shocked breath. Please don't. He knew exactly what would happen if the nightmare died suddenly. I won't, Nick said. The end will happen at the very end, not before they were ready to attack the sun itself. Good, the technician said, already regretting his earlier excitement. This was not a fun conversation. I have one more important thing to say. Not as dangerous, but just as significant, Nick said, and told him about the hidden chamber beneath Crimson City's pillar and the captured Specter inside it. A suppressed peak adversary wasn't something the true enemy would see as a threat, especially one that couldn't even be accessed or worked with. Nick also told him about star energy and pure energy. If the aliens tracked that kind of information, Nick would already be dead for having learned it from the Specter, which meant access to these energies wasn't something the aliens found especially threatening. Now the conversation turned exciting again. More energies than just Prefix and Zephyx. When Nick explained star energy's connection to nuclear fusion, the technician's mind raced. It confirmed nuclear fusion worked, and that the enlightened ones had used it so comfortably they'd built it into countless devices, which finally explained why nobody could interact with their technology. They'd been trying to power it with the wrong energy the whole time. Nick told him about the seeds too, and that the Specter had offered to teach him. This is groundbreaking, the technician said. You're saying we can finally make these implants work? Yes, Nick said, but it'll take a long time, and we might have to slip past the envious researcher more than once to be sure. Not a problem, the technician said. We've dealt with that guy long enough to be pretty good at it, just slow, and it eats a lot of resources. Nick nodded and studied him for a few seconds. The technician felt the atmosphere tighten again. He didn't like that. I saw a squid today, Nick said, serious. The technician could tell from the tone alone that this mattered, but no matter how he turned it over, he couldn't work out what Nick meant. A squid? What squid? Why would a squid matter at all? Seeing his confusion, Nick realized the technician had no idea what the aliens actually looked like. If he had, he'd have made the connection instantly, most likely. Not even the champion of light knew their true appearance. Tentacles are like fingers, right? Nick asked. And with fingers you can build things, machines for example, although you could also just build a huge glass bottle for some experiment. The technician grew more confused, until suddenly he understood the metaphor and his eyes went wide. A squid? He asked, serious now. Yep, Nick said, quite intelligent creatures. Wait, that was octopuses. Well, the squid I saw today was still pretty intelligent. The technician took a deep breath. And where did you find that squid? A bit after looking at the nightmare. By the way, did you know that Zephyx is amazing? Nick asked suddenly. Like, really amazing. Isn't it scary what people would do to get some? It's relatively stable, transports easily. Prefix, meanwhile, is horrible and lacks energy. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could just get some animals to suffer for us, so we could harvest their Zephyx? We'd pump Prefix straight into their enclosure and collect the Zephyx without any issues, though we'd need to be careful not to let them grow too powerful. We could build a base on some other property to make sure they can't break out. Not nearly as big as the enclosure, but still sizable. And here's the important part. We'd need some transportation system that lets us harvest the Zephyx daily without them ever finding it. A very isolated space, watched over by one of our 5 strongest, would work well. That way, the animals can't reach the transport system leading into our base. Just a big wall to keep them out, with tiny holes letting Zephyx, Prefix, maybe mist pass through. We'd also want some kind of self-destruct mechanism, or a huge weapon that could level the whole enclosure if it were ever breached and our guards weren't strong enough. On top of that, the enclosure should sit inside a mostly empty space filled with something deadly to them, star energy, say. That way, even if a Specter escaped the enclosure, it would just die to the star energy waiting outside. Sure, the animals might find some way to build a barrier, armor, or suit that isolates a Specter from star energy's effects. But how? Animals and Specters working together. They're natural enemies. And lastly, how would they even develop a technology like that without us noticing? That strong human is watching everything outside his small office, and they can't just walk in. It's not like some Specter could teleport them there, right? Although if they somehow did get in, they might end up somewhere we can't surveil at all. But no worries, we have our forward base, and no Specter could possibly get there by, say, jumping onto one of our transport vehicles. The technician's mind reeled. He understood exactly what Nick was telling him. It took him a long time to recover. Chapter 731. The technician took a long time to process what Nick had just said. Nick didn't say anything further, letting it sink in. This was a lot to absorb in a couple of minutes. The technician looked away and walked to a random wall, staring into space, eyes unfocused. Is this true? He asked, voice shaky. Is there really a way? Hypothetically speaking, there's a chance, Nick said. Everything is stacked against the animals. It's almost impossible to win, but not completely impossible. The technician went quiet again. Then tears ran down his face as he grimaced. Nick could even hear a couple of sobs. He was genuinely crying, not just shedding a few tears. Seeing that, Nick was glad there were still humans like him, willing to dedicate their lives to bettering humanity, able to weep for a group of people they'd never even met. From the outside, Aegis seemed stable and unified, on its way to dealing with the Specters' technology advancing, more powerful extractors appearing. Behind the scenes, it was nothing like that. The true danger wasn't the sun, but the beings who'd created it, and dealing with them was far harder than dealing with the sun itself. Most likely, the Shields knew about as much as Nick did about the aliens, that they had a base on the moon, and it wasn't hard to guess what they'd stationed there. But they had no plan of attack. How could they, with the champion of light a double agent and no one able to stay hidden in darkness? Light created by Specters wasn't light of the sun, but the Specters still belonged to it, and any dangerous intel could well be passed along to the sun through them as proxies. It was hopeless, well and truly hopeless. But now Nick had a plan. If he could deal with the aliens, humanity would have a chance against the sun. The enlightened ones had most likely succeeded in severely damaging it, maybe even destroying it outright, forcing the aliens to build a new one. But the aliens themselves had been unkillable, unassailable. Why would the animals keep fighting for so long without any hope? Nick asked. The technician understood exactly what he meant. He dried his tears and regained control almost immediately. What else is there to do? He said. Even when things seem impossible, you keep trying, you keep fighting the tide even when nothing changes. But it's difficult, he added with a deep sigh. Fighting something you know you can't beat for your whole life, that's so very difficult. You keep trying again and again and you see some minor success, but in the grand scheme of things, you know it doesn't make a difference. And yet you keep fighting and fighting and fighting, going on and on forever. Just for that small glimmer of hope. You don't hope to win, you only hope it stops looking impossible. You fight for just the tiniest hope. He took a deep breath, and that hope has arrived. The technician finally turned to face Nick, a peaceful smile on his face. You brought us that hope, and that might be the biggest gift humanity has ever received. Thank you, Nick. He was fighting back tears again. Thank you so much, he said, voice shaking. Nick never regretted helping humanity, and right now, he knew it was the right thing to do. Despite his dulled emotions, he still felt the technician's pain and gratitude in full force. The man had always seemed easygoing and casual, but underneath, he carried an impossibly heavy mountain of responsibility and stress, guilty, just like Nick, that he wasn't powerful enough to contribute more. Would I have kept fighting? Nick thought. If I'd known the true extent of humanity's crisis from the start, would I have kept going? Overcoming the sun already seems almost impossible, but its threat pales next to the aliens. It must have felt so oppressive, fighting something this inevitable. I will forward your information to the relevant parties, the technician said, his old demeanor returning, though Nick could hear more life in his words than before. We have our own way of communicating. A moment later, he fell silent. He's probably talking to the left arm, Nick thought. Sure enough, a couple of minutes later. The left arm wants to hear the report from you directly, the technician said. Please go to her. Nick nodded and left without another word. After he'd gone, the technician just stared into space, relieved, and yet, as the warm rays of hope touched his heart, the strangling claw of anxiety gripped it right alongside. The hope was so precious. What if they lost it? Now that he'd tasted it for the first time in his life, he couldn't imagine living without it again. They couldn't lose it, no matter what. Meanwhile, Nick traveled to the halls of remembrance and knocked on the left arm's door. Enter, she said coldly. Nick opened the door and stepped into her dim room. As always, she sat in the middle of it, seemingly focused on something random. Tell me about the ruins and the Specter, she ordered evenly. Nick recounted the Specter's power and what he'd found in the ruins. Do you believe there's a way to make the implants work? She asked. Most likely, but we'd have to advance quite a bit in terms of technology, Nick answered. The champion of light was less than 100 meters away, in the next room, so Nick chose his words carefully, keeping his answers short. I see, she said. You've made a significant contribution. If you wish for a reward, contact the technician, he'll assist you. Thank you, left arm, Nick said respectfully. One more thing. Yes. You put yourself in some danger during this mission, and I need to clarify that this is unacceptable. You are our only Specter, and you offer us several unique, irreplaceable opportunities. Your survival is absolutely paramount. If you ever need assistance, don't hesitate to contact the technician or me. Did I make myself clear? She said, her tone serious. Yes, left arm. I'll be more careful in the future, Nick said. She nodded. Thank you, she said politely. No problem, Nick answered casually before walking out. She'd been subtle about it, but Nick got the message. Walking back to the research and development department, he felt the pressure piling onto him. His standing had changed. His importance had changed. She's saying my survival matters more than Aegis' survival, that if it comes down to it, I should let a shield die to keep myself alive, Nick thought. He was the only one who could assault the alien base. There was literally no other option. If he died, that little glimmer of hope would be snuffed out, and humanity might not get a second chance. His survival mattered more than the survival of the current era itself. As long as Nick lived, the sixth era had hope. That thought put a lot of pressure on him. He wasn't just someone trying to contribute to humanity anymore. His existence was the sole pin keeping it from falling back into the abyss. He had to keep surviving, no matter the cost. As he stepped back into the technician's office, Nick saw something rapidly approaching him. Bang! Nick exploded into light. He couldn't evade in time. In an instant, he felt two strong but small arms wrap around his abdomen, and he realized what was happening. The knife was hugging him tightly, lifting him clean off the ground with her tiny body. The technician just smiled. Thank you, the knife shouted with excitement. Plop. Then she dropped him immediately and stepped back several paces. Don't get used to it. This is the only one you'll ever get, she said, with an exaggerated frown. Nick looked at her for a moment, then a thought struck him. I did it, he thought in shock. I actually did it. I think with this I've actually redeemed myself. His eyes narrowed with conviction. But this isn't where my story ends. I will keep fighting for humanity with or without guilt. Monster or savior, it doesn't matter. I will keep fighting for humanity, no matter what happens. Chapter 732. The knife left pretty quickly, and Nick and the technician continued planning. Ghosty appeared after a while too, though he could only be partially involved. The only things Nick could tell him about were the suppressed adversary and the new energies. Once they'd finished planning, they set things in motion. First, they confiscated the Fiend of Darkness and sent it to the stronghold on the Long Continent, just south of the Great Triangle. They didn't want it at Aegis headquarters because of the Champion of Light, and didn't want it looking too valuable besides. Second, they upgraded Nick's barrier, giving it the ability to convert Specter Zephyx into human Zephyx. That let Nick use plenty of human machines, though he had basically no real control over Zephyx that wasn't his own, limiting him to the most basic functions. Next, they simplified the mechanism behind space bags. Normally, space bags were incredibly secure, requiring a sophisticated method to access. Everyone had to be operated a specific way, or it stayed locked. In Nick's case, that security feature was essentially removed, letting anyone use it. Luckily, his belongings turned to mist along with him whenever he transformed, so he could carry the bag with him regardless. Now that Nick no longer needed to carry his belongings on his body, Ghosty built him several useful trinkets and machines, Zephyx suppressors, Specter cages, and more. Some months passed this way, while Nick slowly prepared to become a demon. By his calculations, he'd get there within less than a year. The technician and Ghosty were very interested in studying him during the advancement. The chance to measure a Specter's progress in detail was rare. Specters and humans advanced in very different ways. For a specialist to become a hero, they needed to master a certain level of control over their Zephyx. When it was time to advance, a peak specialist had to alter the Zephyx inside their body over many days, compressing more and more of it into their Zephyx synchronizer. Normally, a human synchronizer held only about 50% of their Zephyx, the rest scattered through the body. Compressing it all into the synchronizer brought several benefits. First, faster recovery. The relationship between Zephyx and its own recovery worked something like mass and gravity. The more there was, and the denser it was, the faster it recovered. Second, the ability to fly. Flight required complex use of Zephyx, but also a smaller volume of it. A peak specialist could technically fly already, but painfully slowly, several times slower than just running or jumping. With less volume, they could move faster through the air than on the ground. The prefix in the atmosphere interfered with Zephyx's movement, which accounted for the difference in speed. Lastly, higher density meant a bigger release when the Zephyx was finally used. Think of Zephyx like water. If some sat at one point and more was needed from elsewhere, you either created a vacuum to pull it in or physically pushed it there. With increased density, It was like packing that water into a high-pressure vessel, open it, and it released at far greater speed. The normal way of storing Zephyx made small amounts quicker to use, but concentrating it allowed much larger amounts to be used at much greater speed. And in battle, Extractor's abilities all demanded significant amounts of it. The advancement to hero wasn't easy. First, one had to learn a great deal about Zephyx manipulation. Most people spent at least 2 decades studying it before even attempting the advancement, and not everyone was equally talented. Zephyx manipulation required 2 separate skills: theoretical knowledge, which could get quite complex, and a certain feel for control, similar to performing complicated movements with great precision. Some people were excellent students, but had only mediocre control over their own Zephyx. Others had superb control, but struggled to make the calculations needed for complex movements. Advancement was also difficult because of the immense pain involved, something like pulling one's own body parts off to store in a jar. The process wasn't actually dangerous as long as a person didn't lose control completely, but the pain could trigger an instinctive reaction that broke their grip on the Zephyx, sending it back to its original position and forcing them to start over. Some people handled the pain fine, others failed again and again, growing more afraid of it each time, which only made their focus worse. Luckily, most specialists who reached that level didn't struggle with the pain, only around 1 in 10 did. Once someone managed to compress all their Zephyx into their synchronizer, they were essentially ready to become a hero, needing only to work with a fitting Specter to gain their new ability. That was how it worked for humans. For Specters, Aegis knew far less. Science wasn't advanced enough to look inside a Specter's mind, only observe from the outside. The few Specters who could talk and were willing to share their experience all described it differently. Some said it felt like a dream, some like walking a predetermined, lit path, others like being free to choose whatever path they wanted. Their accounts could only be trusted so far, and Aegis couldn't be fully certain what happened during a Specter's advancement. One thing was clear, though. Unlike humans, Specters didn't need to work with anyone to advance. They simply advanced once they'd met some unknown requirement. Aegis' best guess was a certain quantity and quality of human suffering inflicted, quantity being the number of humans made to suffer, quality being how powerful those humans were. The exact threshold seemed to differ from Specter to Specter. Nick had caused an immense amount of suffering in both quantity and quality. There was no doubt he'd already met both requirements. In a bit less than a year, he would advance. For now, he wouldn't leave headquarters since the advancement took priority. The contained adversary could wait. While the months passed and Nick's advancement progressed, 3 things of note happened. First, the stronghold in the west of the Grand Continent, previously destroyed by gluttony, was rebuilt. Second, the Great Triangle was essentially freed of corruptor influence. Pride had once controlled the entire continent, but her empire had crumbled fast after her death, leaving the Great Triangle the only continent without a corruptor's shadow over it. The stronghold in its northwest did wonders, holding back sloth's creeping advance from the north of the Grand Continent. But then, a couple of days before Nick was ready to advance, something horrible happened. Envy broke out. Every protector guarding it died, Simon Francium among them. Nick still remembered him, the first person to show Nick that not everyone only cared about their own gain, and someone who'd once saved Nick's life. In total, 5 protectors died, including a peak protector. Envy was free now, and the long continent where its presence ran strongest had become significantly more dangerous. Worse, without pride in the way, Envy could now advance toward the Great Triangle. Aegis' best investigators traveled to the desolate continent to find out what had happened. There were several channels through which the protectors could reach Aegis, and all of them had suddenly gone dead. Aegis only learned of Envy's escape after the fighting was already over. After a long investigation, they were fairly confident they'd found the cause: greed, the hidden corruptor who worked with none of the trio of destruction. For whatever reason, it had shown up, cut off all communication, and helped kill the protectors alongside Envy. It was a tragedy for humanity. They'd rid themselves of one corruptor only to have another break free. Sadly, Nick wasn't powerful enough to influence any of this yet. That was a problem for the future, once he was far stronger. For now, he focused on his advancement. Just a couple of weeks later, it was time. Chapter 733. Nick sat in the middle of the technician's big room, surrounded by complicated machines. He knew what all of them did, though only how some actually worked. Many had been designed by the technician himself, and when he didn't need anyone else to build them, he tended to make them in his own personal style, which meant chaotic, disorganized circuits and Zephyx manipulations. Thanks to his elite understanding and personal power, plenty of his creations had never even passed the envious researcher's ordeal, a convenient excuse for building machines no one else could understand. Ghosty was present too, though he only handled the normal machines. "Is it happening?" the technician asked. "No," Nick answered. He'd asked that question many times over the last few days. Nick had never advanced as a Specter before, and they couldn't be sure he'd get any warning when it happened, so they simply waited, ready to start recording at any second. "Maybe you should extend another guard sentence," the technician said. "I don't think that'll change anything." "If you say so." Nick kept waiting and waiting. "Is it starting?" "No." More waiting. "Is it starting?" "Yes." The technician did a double take. "Yes." "Yes," Nick shouted, vertigo suddenly hitting him. The technician and Ghosty scrambled to fire up their machines. Nick gritted his teeth. The world had started changing seconds ago, everything around him going hazy, his perception scattering like he was working through the foul senses again. If he'd had a stomach, he was sure it would have turned. The world went dark, then lit up again. Through the haze, he could see Ghosty and the technician still tinkering with their machines. Slowly, figures began to appear around him, human, of every age, gender, social standing, and power. Among them, Nick spotted a few familiar faces, Marcus Julius chief among them. All of them radiated pain, suppression, fear. All of them were suffering. Finally, the machines, Ghosty, and the technician vanished completely. Darkness swallowed everything around Nick, and the silhouettes of the many people sharpened. The haze in his mind lifted, and he felt like he'd regained control of his body, strange, since he'd never actually lost it. Nick stood and looked around. He was on top of a white plain just a couple of meters wide, the suffering figures writhing in agony all around him. A moment later, he noticed the sun was present. It hadn't been there in the technician's room, but now it hung overhead, shining down on his plane. Nick stood there for several seconds. Nothing happened. He didn't feel any different, didn't feel any stronger. Then he felt the urge to move in a certain direction, and he followed it, stepping toward the edge of his plane. At that, several of the silhouettes crumbled into white dust, their figures vanishing as the dust gathered on the ground ahead of him, forming a small path. Nick advanced along it, and more people turned to dust to extend it further. After a couple of meters, the silhouettes that hadn't yet dissolved began to change. Terrifying horrors appeared around them, inflicting physical and emotional torment. "I can't do that," Nick realized. "I can somewhat control the nightmare's influence, but I can't create tortures like these on my own." Then it clicked. "I'm choosing my new ability right now, and the direction I pick must represent the ability I'll get." He looked around. Judging by these horrors, continuing this way would give me some kind of torture-based illusion power. Nick's eyes narrowed. That would probably cause the most suffering to humans of anything available here. He immediately pushed back against the pull. It's a Specter's instinct and goal to cause suffering. Following it blindly would hand me an ability built for exactly that. Specters without intelligence would just follow wherever instinct led them. He looked up at the sun. Is it my nature as a Specter sending me down this path, or is it the sun? Its presence in this dream world can't be a coincidence. A thought struck him. Is the sun the one actually giving Specters their abilities? If every Specter comes from the sun, that would make sense. Specters are an artificial creation of the sun, which is itself an artificial creation of the aliens. The sun is most likely the very machine that lets Specters exist and grow. A Specter doesn't gain a new ability so much as receive one from the sun. He looked at the small path he'd made. Though the sun probably doesn't force a Specter down any specific path, the fact that I can resist this pull so easily proves that, and plenty of Specters have said they could choose freely. It makes sense. As far as I know, the sun isn't sentient, just a machine that lets Specters exist, while some of those Specters are intelligent. Would I ask a single-celled organism to assign a human their career? No. The sun leaves anything smart enough to reason for itself the freedom to choose. Nick stepped back onto the plain, and the path in front of him vanished, the dust reforming into suffering silhouettes as the horrors faded and everything returned to how it had started. This time he chose a different direction. White dust built a new path, and the silhouettes changed again, writhing in agony as black smoke poured from their wounds. Poison probably, Nick thought, stepping back to Trey again. This time the horrors made people physically ill. He tried several more directions, until eventually something appeared that left the silhouettes untouched. Instead, his own body changed. He grew several long, shadowy arms tipped with terrifying claws. A Specter's appearance can change with an advancement too, he remembered. Walking a different way, he found himself automatically turning to mist. When the mist brushed against the silhouettes on that path, they dissolved to goo. Not an ability he wanted. He wasn't entirely sure what he was looking for yet, but he knew it wasn't any of these. After 20 more attempts, something new appeared, a path that changed neither him nor the people around him. He followed it a bit further, and as he did, he began to grasp the underlying logic of how these paths were arranged and what this one meant. Intelligence, he realized, thinking of the big-brain slug and its terrifying mind. He ran some calculations and found complex math suddenly, obviously easier. This was the first path that genuinely interested him. The ability to boost his own intelligence was staggering, and he could imagine dozens of uses for it. But his newly sharpened mind delivered an uncomfortable truth of its own. Intelligence matters enormously to society, but as hard as it is to admit, in combat it mostly just unlocks new, more efficient ways to deal with an enemy. It has only a limited effect on raw power output. If I were in a fight, I'd rather have a strong man beside me than a weak, clever one. There's only so much a clever but weak man can do against an oncoming bear. Intelligence is fascinating, but ironically, my own heightened intelligence is telling me it isn't the most useful thing on offer here. A truly intelligent man knows how to avoid an unfavorable fight in the first place. The best way to survive is to never fight at all. Nick returned to his plane, back to his normal self, and without hesitating, walked down a different path. This ability wouldn't be useful in combat and wouldn't raise his power at all, but it would make everything else far easier and unlock things he currently couldn't do. Eventually, all the silhouettes turned to white dust, and the path came to its end. Nick stepped into the darkness surrounding him. The next moment he woke up, he had his new ability. Chapter 734. Nick woke up in the technician's room and looked around. "Already done, that was fast," the technician said. "Yes, I'm done. How long was I gone?" Nick asked. "Like 3 seconds, the technician said. "Your eyes closed and you basically opened them again, like a very slow blink." Nick frowned. "Felt like at least 30 minutes to me." "What did you see?" Ghosty asked, deactivating his machines. Nick stood and told them about the paths, most importantly, that Specters didn't just gain new abilities, but that the sun most likely granted them directly. "The suffering I caused in my life turned into the energy that built my path," he said. "After walking back and forth a few times, I noticed the weaker humans turned to white dust that merged with the dust of the stronger ones. Without the strong humans, the path probably wouldn't have been stable enough to hold me. Without the weak ones, there probably wouldn't have been enough dust to reach the end. That explains the quantity and quality requirements." "Interesting," the technician said. "What about the abilities?" Nick described the many he'd seen. "That's quite a privilege," the technician said. "Humans can only pick abilities based on a fitting Specter, and even then we can't know for sure what we'll get, only that it's related to the Specter's powers. Being able to actually see your options ahead of time is a huge advantage. You don't even need a matching human or Specter to get it." He sighed. "No wonder all the Specter's abilities mesh so well together, while most Extractors end up with abilities they basically have to use separately." Nick nodded. When he reached the part about choosing to raise his intelligence, both scientists' eyes went wide. "You can do that. I'm pretty sure humans can't," the technician said. "That's insane. It speeds up how fast I calculate things, makes complex problems almost obvious," Nick said. "But it's not what I picked." They were both surprised. "Why not? I can't imagine anything better," the technician said. "You need hands to hold a weapon, but without the weapon, you're still weak," Nick said. "You're saying intelligence without strength is meaningless?" Ghosty asked, sounding a little called out. "If you can lean on the strength around you, intelligence is the most important thing there is," Nick said. "But I don't have that luxury. I operate alone most of the time. Heightened intelligence would help a lot, but there's only so much you can do with a limited set of tools. Instead, I picked something that lets me use every tool humanity has to offer. On top of that, it might open a door that used to seem impossible." "What is it?" the technician asked, Ghosty leaning in with interest too. "This," a different voice said. They both turned to the new person in the room. It was the technician, a second one. Where Nick had just been standing was now the technician himself. "You can change your appearance?" Ghosty asked. "Yes, but that's not everything," Nick said, still wearing the technician's face. He reached out and touched a random gadget in the room, and it switched on a device that could only run on human Zephyx without Nick's barrier anywhere in the process. Both men's eyes went wide. "I can become whoever I want," Nick said, his tone cold and serious, as he shifted into the left arm mannerisms voice, all of it changing automatically, so long as he actually knew the person. Then he shifted again into a sickly cripple with a deformed face. I can also become someone I've never met. My aura as a Specter disappears entirely, and I can convert my Zephyx into human Zephyx, letting me use human technology without restriction. He let out a breath. I can even imitate the inside of a human body, every organ. All my Specter Zephyx retreats into my Specter core, and anything that leaves it can turn into human Zephyx. If I shroud the core itself in human Zephyx, I can even dodge devices built to sense Specters. The more he explained, the more absurd it sounded. There were machines specifically designed to catch Specters disguising as humans. But advanced sensors could still catch you, right? The technician asked. I don't think so, Nick said. I know how they work, and short of literally sticking a needle into my Specter core, I don't think they could unmask me. We have to test that, the technician shouted, grabbing an armful of devices. He tried everything he had to expose Nick's identity. Every single one failed, even the most advanced. Of course they did, Nick added, watching him work. Without deep knowledge of zephology, spectrology, biology, and Zephyx manipulation, I couldn't pull this off at all. But I know how our sensors work, how Specters work, how Zephyx works, and how human bodies work. He narrowed his eyes, shifting back into himself. This puts my new ability on par with heightened intelligence, with one more edge that puts it slightly above. Both men leaned in, interested. Sorry, Ghosty, I can't share the details. This touches on secret matters, Nick said. Ghosty sighed, disappointed but understanding. The rest, Nick sent straight to the technician's mind. I'm not sure I can pull this off yet, but a Specter's existing powers grow stronger as they advance. My current disguise might not manage it now, but with more power it might. If I can build a perfect human body, I might get to use it at the most critical moment humanity will ever face. The most critical moment, the technician could only think of one candidate, the assault on the alien base, Nick's plan to destroy it, and then he understood. You might become immune to star energy, he transmitted back, shocked. It should be possible, Nick sent back. This isn't just a disguise, I'm changing the fundamentals of my existence, aside from my Specter core. As far as I know, star energy doesn't damage humans, it might even improve them, might even be more beneficial than Prefix or Zephyx. If I can shift my existence far enough, I might be able to store star energy inside my body, letting me survive somewhere with only star energy and no Prefix at all. I might even unlock a disguise that's neither human nor Specter, nor animal, if you catch my meaning. The aliens came to the technician's mind immediately. If Nick could perfectly imitate them, the possibilities were endless. With access to star energy, he could even use their own technology. On top of that, I could hide from certain humans if they ever decided I'd become too dangerous, Nick transmitted, meaning the champion of light. Even if Aegis turned on him someday, he could stay hidden. His survival mattered more than anything right now, and this ability all but guaranteed it. He could pass as a Specter among Specters, a human among humans, and hide his whereabouts and actions from Aegis entirely. He now had the best of both worlds, the powers of Specters and of humans both. Nick shifted into the appearance of the long-dead Julian and smirked. And lastly, I can infiltrate the corruptors again, he said aloud. True to his word, he now had every tool available to him. He wasn't bound to a single identity anymore, he had all of them. And if everyone who'd ever known him died, he'd have none at all. All right, Nick said, shifting back to himself. Now about my other abilities. Right, Ghosty said. I always think of you as human when I look at you. I keep forgetting you're a Specter, and that your other abilities improve too. Nick nodded, all of them did. First, Chapter 735. It was time for Nick to unveil his upgraded abilities. There was a lot to go through, and the upgrades were significant. It was hard for even Nick to believe how much he'd improved from a single advancement. His new body-changing ability was already powerful on its own, but paired with the upgrades to his other powers, it felt like an earth-shattering transformation. First, a major weakness in my main ability is gone, so we can talk without any fear now, Nick said. Ghosty and the technician leaned in. Right now, I know I'm being perceived, but I can also feel who's perceiving me. I can feel you two looking at me, and where you're standing without even opening my eyes. As long as anyone perceives me, I can feel where they're looking from and how many of them there are, Nick explained. Ghosty found that impressive. Only the technician grasped how useful it really was. They'd always had to watch for the champion of light looking their way during conversations. Now, if he did, Nick could just switch topics or stop someone before they said too much. You could find the corruptors and the trio of destruction with that. the technician said quietly, almost as if afraid someone might overhear. Nick nodded. I doubt I could pin down their location through a greater relay, but if they're looking at me with their physical bodies, I should be able to feel it. The technician's heart raced. So you could find death too if you left headquarters. I should be able to, Nick confirmed. That was terrifyingly useful. Finding the powerful Specters had always been the hardest part, and now they had a way to know where one was. Still, the technician frowned. As amazing as it sounded, they couldn't actually use it, not without revealing that Nick's primary ability had this weakness in the first place, and that would make the champion far too wary of just how far beyond a normal demon Nick's power really went. We might be able to deal with the envious researcher with that, Ghosty said. Finding it has always been the problem. If we know where to strike, we might actually be able to fight it. Not that easy, the technician said. It's most likely a peak adversary, as powerful as death and incredibly good at escaping. We might fight it more efficiently, but not truly deal with it. And Nick's ability only works if the enemy is perceiving him, which puts him in danger too. Ghosty shrugged. You put yourself in danger for humanity, we all do, lives on the line. Not using this would be a waste. Yes, probably, the technician said, though privately he knew they could never risk Nick that easily. Only the left arm, the technician, and the knife understood Nick's true value. They'd sooner risk every shield they had than risk him. He couldn't say that to Ghosty, though. My next upgrade concerns my mist ability, Nick said, changing the subject. A cloud of black smoke about 3 meters across wrapped around his body. It barely costs any Zephyx to maintain, and while it's active, no one can pin my exact location. Even at only half efficiency, I'm still 2.5 times stronger than without it, so I don't lose access to all my power if an enemy finds me. The two of them realized the significance immediately. Nick wouldn't be completely helpless anymore. Very useful, the technician said. Ghosty nodded in agreement. Have all your abilities improved that much? He asked. Not all of them, Nick said. My light ability for one barely changed. He pointed at the wall. Bang! A bright beam shot from his finger and struck it. You can shoot lasers, the technician asked, surprised. Yes, but they're not very powerful, nothing compared to my other attacks. With my primary ability active, I could kill a peak specialist with it. That's about it. Only? Ghosty repeated, blinking. Instantly killing a peak specialist from kilometers away, silently at lightspeed, that counted as weak. In Nick's case, only seems about right, the technician said, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. Technically, Nick said, the real improvement isn't firing lasers, it's focusing my light more tightly. I'll probably use it to blind an enemy rather than attack them, since it costs less Zephyx that way. Both of them nodded, made sense. My ability from the nightmare improved in 2 ways, Nick continued. First, creating illusions now costs about half what it used to. Won't matter most of the time, but when things get serious, it could save my life. They nodded again. Zephyx efficiency was always worth improving. Next, dark clouds burst out of him, covering most of the walls on his side of the room, leaving the other half untouched. The 2 scientists could tell right away these clouds were nothing like his usual mist, almost solid, clinging to whatever they touched. The point became clear soon enough. The clouds swallowed all light that touched them. These absorb any light that hits them, Nick said. I can't blot out the sun with it, but I can darken an entire hall. A moment later, light reached him again. Sadly, they don't last under 2 seconds before they vanish, and they cost a lot of Zephyx to use. Still, the ability was more than just useful. It made Nick a human killer outright. As long as he shared a room with someone, he could subject them to the nightmare's influence, something almost no human could resist. Only those with light-generating abilities or gadgets stood a chance, and even they needed time and Zephyx to use them, time Nick could exploit to strike first. My maw ability improved in 2 ways too, Nick said. First, my enhanced perception stays active even while I'm being perceived myself. Both scientists looked increasingly stunned. Nick's abilities really had come a long way. I can't show you the second improvement. It needs the ability active to demonstrate. But I can now skip the entry portal entirely. Instead of touching something solid to travel through the maw, I can just create the exit portal and go straight there. The exit portal itself hasn't changed, and it still costs a lot of Zephyx to pull off, almost 30% of my reserves. That's still crazy, the technician said. It is, Nick agreed. That's everything. Add in my new ability to change my body, and I'm essentially not the same person anymore. They had to agree. Nick's upgrade was absurd. Neither of them knew of anyone with a comparably versatile toolkit. He could sense who was sensing him, cloak himself in smoke, focus his light, conjure light-devouring clouds. His perception no longer depended on his primary ability alone. His illusions cost less Zephyx, and he could transport himself straight to an exit portal. On top of all that, he could become anyone, and use human technology again without restriction. Every one of his old weaknesses had been dulled by the advancement. His raw attacking power hadn't grown at all, but his stealth and survivability had leapt forward immensely. He didn't need more offense. His attacks were already terrifying enough. If anything, Nick had improved in exactly the way that mattered most. His survival, and every one of his new abilities served that single goal. In every practical sense, Nick's life had just gone a great deal easier. Chapter 736. Are you one of the esteemed researchers? One of the guards atop Aegis headquarters asked. A thin, blond man nodded with a smile. Indeed, I'm supposed to come here. The others are already waiting over there, the guard said, pointing to a group of 4 people. I apologize, but this mission has been deemed very important, so I must ask you to identify yourself. Sorry for the inconvenience. Oh, not at all, the blond man said with a nervous smile. I understand. Security is important. He activated his barrier. The guard's barrier answered, and the guard nodded. Thank you for identifying yourself, Mr. Silver. Mr. Silver nodded, pointing awkwardly at the group. So I can walk over now. Of course, sir. Thanks, Mr. Silver said, walking over. There you are, Michael, an older man greeted him. It was Ghosty. Michael Silver's face lit with an excited smile. Ghosty was a legend among researchers, and Michael had always wanted to work alongside him. Now, finally, he had the chance. Look at your #1 fan, Ghosty, another older man said with a smirk. The way he keeps staring, I'd say he wants a piece of you. Michael went red, caught somewhere between embarrassment and fear. Let the poor kid be, Horatio, a younger, black-haired woman said. He's new. I'd appreciate it if you kept the jokes in check for the mission. Ghosty just watched his team of researchers squabble. The 5 of them were headed to Crimson City to examine the ruins there. According to Aegis, a lot of Enlightened One's technology lay buried underneath. The group had 5 specialists, with Ghosty leading, and depending on what the ruins turned up, they might be stationed in Crimson City for years. A long mission like that needed real cooperation, and while everyone here knew each other, some pairs barely had. For whatever reason, the team had been pulled together from people who used to work in entirely different departments. Cross-department missions happened, but rarely ones this long. I'm already getting a headache, Ghosty whispered to Michael. Michael looked at him, alarmed. Kidding, Ghosty added with a smile. Oh ha ha, Michael managed with an awkward chuckle. Don't be so tense, Ghosty said. We'll be together a while. Give it a couple of days and we'll be working together like old friends. Of course you're right, Michael said, a little too loudly, drawing a few glances. Ghosty chuckled while the others went back to bickering. This group was full of well-regarded researchers, not quite among the handful of true top researchers in the world, who were almost all protectors, but close, with real potential to join those ranks. Every one of those top researchers had absorbed a mid-elder on their way to the 5th level, giving them the foundation to become protectors eventually. Everyone except Ghosty, who'd only managed an early elder and had no real shot at that rank, and yet he was the only specialist who'd still made it into the top tier of researchers. He was one of the sharpest minds of the era, and every researcher here knew it. Michael watched the others bicker, growing a little worried. This team seemed dysfunctional, and he couldn't picture such different personalities working smoothly together. Don't worry, Ghosty said, noticing his concern. We all have different personalities, but we all share the same goal. None of us would put personal feelings above humanity. Was that what the screening was for? Michael asked. Sharp Ghosty said, yes it was. Michael wanted to ask more about that screening. A few days earlier he'd been led into an isolated room alone. After waiting a while the lights had cut out and the nightmare's influence had washed over him, though not the usual way. No real pain, just a parade of faces and situations. When his dead wife's face appeared, he'd nearly cried. She'd been killed by a Specter in a part of the city that was supposed to be safe. It happened anyway. Michael had buried the grief in his studies, chasing the feeling of growth, of purpose, until years later Aegis arrived and tore down the city's leadership. It turned out to have been under Wrath's influence the whole time. Aegis noticed his talent and brought him into research and development, and he'd finally found a new goal, getting rid of every Specter there was. Sir, I don't want to rush you, but one of the guards murmured to Ghosty. A clock appeared on Ghosty's barrier. "That late already? Sure, let's go," he told the guard. "All right, simmer down," he said to his team, and the chatter died. "Time to head out. Keep the talking to a minimum during the flight. You'll have plenty of time once we're there." The others nodded. Ghosty pulled a large disc from his space bag and set it on the ground. The team stepped onto it without being asked twice, Ghosty joining them before turning to one of the guards. "If you would." "Thank you, sir," the guard said, lifting the disc carefully. The second guard took to the sky ahead of them, and the first followed, holding the disc steady overhead, the usual way Aegis moved people who couldn't fly themselves. Protectors could lift passengers with their minds alone, but these guards weren't skilled enough in Zephyx manipulation for that. The group crossed the Great Triangle, the researchers watching the land and cities pass below with real interest. They rarely left the lab, and seeing the world still excited them. Eventually, they entered the airspace above the Great Ocean west of the Great Triangle. "Everyone," Ghosty said, "whatever happens now, stay calm, don't do anything reckless. This is supposed to happen." The group turned to him, confused and uneasy. Even the guards frowned. What was he talking about? "Crack." Everyone's eyes went wide at the sound of a barrier shattering somewhere ahead of them. They looked over just as the leading guard split into two pieces, and before anyone could react, everything went white and their vision failed. The disc began to fall as the guard below braced for combat. Crack. Not even 0.2 seconds later came the sound of a second barrier breaking. "Do not move," Ghosty said calmly, pulling out a device. They watched in horror as he pressed a button. Crack, 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 crack. Every barrier in the group shattered at once. Their Zephyx vanished, their Zephysis cut out, and for a moment they all felt like they were suffocating, until a cloud of Zephyx rose from the disk and enveloped them, and their Zephysis kicked back on. "Don't do anything," Ghosty shouted. His calm gone, he'd lost his own Zephyx too, and the shock of having his lifeline severed, even briefly, hadn't worn off yet. The man who'd embarrassed Michael earlier ignored him and jumped off the edge. His shoes ignited, arresting his fall, and he shot off toward the Great Triangle, some kind of homemade flying device. Everyone watched him go. Nothing happened to him at all. They turned back to Ghosty, who'd already regained his composure, and for 3 long seconds nobody moved. "Good," Ghosty said. Then to no one in particular, "He's not trustworthy, please." A beam of white light shot out from beneath the disk and struck the fleeing man. He spiraled out of control and plunged toward the ocean. "As you might have noticed, we've stopped falling and our course has changed," Ghosty said calmly. Everyone's eyes widened. They genuinely hadn't noticed. These were researchers, not soldiers. Fights weren't exactly their specialty. "I've been lying about the nature of this mission," Ghosty said, looking at the 3 researchers still left. Their faces went white with terror. What was going on? Chapter 737. The researchers stared at Ghosty in shock and fear. He looked surprisingly calm. What the fuck was going on? Their escorts were dead, and so was one of their own teammates. "You 3 have officially died just now," Ghosty said with a calm smile. "As far as humanity is concerned, at least. During the journey, the Shark Mother attacked, and we lost a group of our most talented researchers. A true tragedy for Aegis." He looked at them. "But not a tragedy for humanity." What is going on?" Michael asked, voicing what they were all thinking. "I'll explain everything once we arrive," Ghosty said. "You don't need to be afraid. I'm not going rogue, building some private army. This whole operation has the backing of 3 shields. You won't be forced into any atrocities, and we're not working with the Specters. We're working for the true good of humanity." The black-haired woman frowned. "Isn't Aegis the true good of humanity?" Ghosty shook his head slowly. "It's not that simple. The deck is stacked against us, and fewer than 10 people in the world know why. With you 3, that's more than 10 now. You're going to be part of the backbone of humanity's true freedom." It sounded absurd, over the top. They were just specialists. How could they be the backbone of all humanity? "Hey, aren't we descending a bit early?" The third researcher, an older man, shouted in panic as he saw them dropping toward the ocean. The other 2 panicked too. Touching the water meant the Shark Mother or the Salt Trident would kill them. "Don't worry, everything's been prepared," Ghosty said, mysterious. The researchers screamed as the disc plunged into the ocean. They braced for death. Nothing happened. They were only submerged in water, and then they noticed they weren't touching salt water at all and that a wall surrounded them. They were inside some kind of pipe, descending into the depths. The Salt Trident's influence couldn't reach them. The pipe sat in the ocean but wasn't part of it. As they kept descending, the next shock arrived. It was getting darker. The nightmare. And yet its influence never came, even once everything had gone pitch black. Looking around at the darkness, they felt like they were dreaming. None of them had ever stood in the dark without being tortured for it. It was an entirely new experience. After nearly half a minute, the pipe curved and rose again, carrying them out of the water but still in darkness. It became a tunnel, and they kept moving until they stopped before a gate. The disc landed, and Ghosty walked toward it. "Follow me," he said. The researchers were still afraid, but helpless. Whatever had killed their escorts was still out there somewhere unseen. "Rank 7 material," Michael said, shocked, looking at the gate. Ghosty nodded. "Same material as Aegis headquarters. You can thank the technician for it." Light bloomed from the ceiling, a floating ball of it. That was Nick. Keeping the nightmare's influence suppressed cost too much Zephyx, so he'd switched to his light ability instead, which used far less. "This is one of our allies," Ghosty said, gesturing to the light. "His identity is sensitive and it must stay secret." The researchers eyed the light with fear. Whoever was inside it could kill them without any trouble. Ghosty's barrier activated against the gate, and it swung open. "This is only a small part of the whole," he said. Only, the researchers thought. Beyond it lay a bright hall, over 100 meters wide, packed with equipment, set up almost exactly like the real research and development department back at Aegis. "A flexinator," Michael shouted, staring at one especially large machine. "You're humanity's hope now," Ghosty said. "We won't treat you poorly." "But only the technician knows how to run one of these," Michael said. "This is a simplified version," Ghosty said. "Because of the envious researcher, you three will have to work out its more complex functions on your own. For security, no single technology built down here can be known by everyone. I'll leave the flexinator to the three of you. We don't have the luxury of getting it past the envious researcher, which means nothing in here counts as approved." That didn't trouble the researchers much. They lived with the envious researcher as a constant fear regardless, every time they built something new. With the hall lit, Nick no longer needed to hold his light and simply vanished. "Can you explain everything now?" the black-haired woman asked. "Part of it," Ghosty said. "I can't give you the full truth until you're cleared for the true core of the lab." He walked to a table near the edge of the room with a few chairs around it and sat. The other three followed but stayed standing, too uneasy to sit. "All right," Ghosty said, taking a breath. "The Champion of Light is an agent. He works for the sun." Shock and horror swept over them. "That doesn't make sense," the older man said, frowning. "But it's true," Ghosty said. "Where did he come from? None of the shields knew him before he showed up in front of headquarters out of nowhere. How does he speak to all of humanity through the sun? Why would he call the sun our ally when it clearly isn't?" He cut off the older man before he could argue further. "The sun chooses a champion to watch over humanity and make sure it never grows strong enough to threaten it. The old Champion of Light was an agent too, but he came to regret it, and it's only because of him that we know any of this. He told the shields the truth once, during a rare moment free of the sun's supervision. The champion has partial control over the sun and can direct it to act. The old champion cut the shields off from its network just long enough to tell them everything, but that had consequences. The sun weakened him as punishment until a new champion was ready to take his place. He paid for that with his life." It all sounded far too fantastical to the researchers. "All of this comes from the technician and the left arm. They're the ones running this whole secret operation," Ghosty said. "And the old champion's words have been confirmed by a third party. Our unnamed friend who brought us here saw the truth himself." Still, they weren't satisfied. "Explanations," the black-haired woman said. "What about proof? Extraordinary claims need extraordinary proof." "You'll have proof soon enough," Ghosty said, turning to the older man. "How close are you to advancing?" "A couple more years," the man answered, guarded. Ghosty pulled something from his space bag. "Elixirs," the woman shouted. "You're humanity's new backbone," Ghosty repeated. "The shields behind this won't hold anything back." He pushed the elixirs toward the older man. The man stared at them, stunned. "But that's a waste," Ghosty finished for him. "You're looking at it wrong. 5 new experts can't save humanity. You can. Take them, you should be ready to advance within the day. And then I'll show you the proof you're asking for." He smiled faintly. "Honestly, it'll be my first time seeing it too. Up to now, I've only had the technician and a friend of mine describing it to me. But I promise within a day you'll believe me." Chapter 738. "Please confirm your identity, sir," a guard asked politely. Ghosty's barrier was already active, masking his features. A moment later, it exchanged signals with the guards. "Welcome, Special Agent," the guard said. The identity his barrier displayed was fake, of course. The older man beside him presented his own credentials too, identifying him as another special agent. Ghosty had handed out new barriers to everyone after their talk. The older man's real name was Ferdinand Helix, and he was here to see the proof. For just a moment, he considered exposing Ghosty to the guard right then and there. They stood at the stronghold in the northwest of the Great Triangle. There'd be protectors nearby, and Ferdinand figured he could probably escape if it came to that. Ghosty had abducted 3 researchers, after all, and Ferdinand didn't believe a word of this garbage about the champion being a traitor. But Ferdinand always gave people the chance to prove their claims first. He wanted to see this proof Ghosty kept talking about. If it turned out to be true, he'd have a duty to help. And if he exposed Ghosty wrongfully, he'd never forgive himself. Not even his own death could pay for a betrayal like that against humanity. Besides, some of Ghosty's wilder claims already had some support. The new barriers, the machines, that gate, nobody but the technician could have built any of it. Though it was still possible, the technician simply wanted to seize the champion's position for himself. The 2 researchers went inside. Nick came with them unseen. They walked several hallways before stopping at a containment unit. Its doors opened, revealing a floating black cloak. The Fiend of Darkness moved here under the left arm's orders. It wasn't moving, wasn't attacking. Nick was already inside the unit, and he'd ordered it to stay still. Ferdinand knew Ghosty's mysterious friend was somewhere nearby, and no matter how hard he searched, he couldn't find him at all, which only made him more nervous. "It's going to swallow us now," Ghosty said. "Remember what I told you." Ferdinand nodded, heart pounding. He knew he had to survive several seconds of the worst torture the nightmare could offer. "Ready?" Ghosty asked. Ferdinand nodded with conviction. For humanity, he'd gladly endure it. The Fiend of Darkness swallowed them both. Ferdinand plunged into a world of pain and misery, dead friends and family tortured before his eyes, the vilest acts performed on him, all of it unbearably real. He wanted to die. He wanted to die so badly, but he couldn't. Then his eyes opened. He was on a white plain ringed by darkness, his mind still reeling. Bang! Something slapped him, and he shot to his feet. Bang! A kick sent him sprawling, and that was when he felt a motionless body underneath him. His heightened senses placed it instantly. Ghosty. He'd lost consciousness and needed help. Ferdinand grabbed the device Ghosty had given him for exactly this situation. He'd been told, more than once, never to wake someone the normal way, only with the device. He activated it, and a needle shot out, burying itself in Ghosty's neck. A few seconds of odd fluctuations later, Ghosty's eyes opened. "Are you okay?" Ferdinand asked. Ghosty blinked, taking stock. "Wow, guess I'm not as resilient to torture as you, thanks." Ferdinand nodded. "I still want to see your proof. I'd rather you not die before then." Then something occurred to him. "Why didn't your friend wake you?" Ghosty smiled, embarrassed. "Probably wanted to test you." Ferdinand didn't care for that at all. He never liked being tested. "So where's this proof?" he asked, a little irritated. "We need to walk a bit," Ghosty said, setting off in a direction Nick had quietly given him. After a while he stopped and pointed ahead. "There." Ferdinand focused on a distant speck as they closed the distance, and it resolved into something unmistakable, a rotting corpse. Neither of them spoke again until they reached it. This was Ghosty's first time seeing the nightmare's true body too, and he looked just as shaken as Ferdinand felt. It was tragic, sad, almost simple. "This is the nightmare," Ghosty said. Ferdinand's mind reeled. He hadn't guessed this would be the proof. The nightmare's actual body. It used to be the strongest human alive, back in the era of the Enlightened Ones. He nearly won. Instead, the enemy turned him into this. Ghosty crouched and touched the corpse. "Go ahead, touch it. It's just a machine now." Ferdinand knelt and did the same. It felt massive. Flesh that looked ready to crumble at the faintest touch was somehow as hard as the walls of Aegis headquarters, if not harder. Ghosty produced a device, a tiny camera on the end of an impossibly thin tube, and fed it into one of the rotting holes. A wisp of mist slipped out to meet it, Nick, already inside, guiding the camera through the gaps. Ghosty watched through the feed as the machine buried in the nightmare's neck came into view and had to take a breath. It was so strange, so alien. He couldn't begin to guess how it worked, though its function was plain enough, keeping the Zephyx synchronizer spinning, forcing it to stay active. He handed the visor to Ferdinand, who was equally stunned. "This is our true enemy," Ghosty said. "Never speak of this to anyone, not even your new colleagues. They'll see it with their own eyes eventually. This enemy's identity can never be named or revealed. You can only witness it and carry it in your heart." Ferdinand's nerves spiked. He could tell this was staggeringly advanced, alien technology, nothing like anything humanity had built. Guesses formed in his mind, but he didn't dare speak them. How did the Ancient Ones die? Why does technology this advanced even exist? What could possibly stand against weapons that destroy planets? You're a brilliant scientist. I know you'll find the answer yourself. But never speak it aloud. Trust that the others will reach the same place on their own, Ghosty said. After a moment, Ferdinand nodded silently. The nightmare's true nature didn't technically prove the champion of light was a traitor, but it revealed the true enemy, and in a way, that made the other question almost beside the point. The true enemy would never allow information like this to leak, which meant Ghosty couldn't possibly be working for them, which meant he was on humanity's side. That was all Ferdinand needed. He didn't care whose banner he followed, so long as their goal matched his own. We're going to synchronize with the nightmare now and gain its ability, Ghosty said. Ferdinand startled again. How is that even possible? This isn't a Specter. What is a Specter, really? Ghosty asked. What's a human? Strip it down and both are just complex biological machines. They only differ in how they're made and how they work. This wasn't born a Specter, but the way its power operates is no different from one. Our Zephyx synchronizers should still be able to attune to it, the same as they would to any Specter. Ferdinand had no argument against that. A while later, the two of them began their advancement beside the nightmare's corpse. This was the key. The nightmare would be the key to humanity's freedom. With its power, researchers could work in darkness, hidden from the sun's sight. The champion of the enlightened ones had left the next generation an invaluable gift. A way forward. Chapter 739. Oh, they're back, Harana the black-haired scientist said. Michael watched the big gate open, and a moment later Ghosty and Ferdinand reappeared. Both of them had become heroes. Your heroes now, right? Michael asked. Ghosty nodded. Yeah, went relatively smoothly. Congratulations, I can't wait to become one myself, Michael said, excited. I'm more interested in the proof, Harana said, looking at Ferdinand. He seemed conflicted. He hadn't had time to properly process what he'd learned. I saw the proof, he said. And Harana pressed, a little annoyed. It's a lot, Ferdinand said. I can't confirm everything Ghosty's told you, but I can confirm they're on humanity's side. He frowned, looking down. I'm fine working for them. I don't think they're trying to spark some revolution just to seize control. I genuinely believe they're on our side. Harana grew more annoyed. But what's the actual proof? I can't talk about it. Not because I don't want to, I do. But some of it is too dangerous to say out loud. Talking about it could endanger all of humanity. You have to see it yourself. All I can tell you is that I trust Ghosty and that the world isn't nearly as straightforward as it looks. You'll see it yourself once you're ready to become a hero. Harana clearly wasn't satisfied. Fine, she said, irritated. I'll give Ghosty the benefit of the doubt until I'm a hero and see this proof myself. Ferdinand nodded. That's all I can ask. Ghosty had stayed mostly quiet through the exchange. We can start working now, he said. We'll split into two teams. Ferdinand and I will focus on something we can't discuss yet, while you two handle manufacturing. You can't tell us what you're working on, Michael asked, disappointed. Harana just snorted. You'll know when you're heroes, Ghosty said. For now, everything stays secret. Even Ferdinand doesn't know what we're researching yet. Ferdinand said nothing. By the way, Ghosty said, pointing to a door at the edge of the room, have you looked in there yet? We weren't sure we were allowed. We are prisoners after all, Harana said, venomous. Ghosty scratched the back of his head awkwardly. There's a peak fanatic in there, pretty easy to work with. Just walk in, give it some blood, and walk back out should cover your quota for the day. To keep things as secret as possible, Nick had captured that Specter himself, spending several days hunting for a fitting one, disguised as Ghosty the whole time, so it believed Ghosty had been the one to catch it. The four of them talked over their assignments before Ferdinand and Ghosty passed through a large gate leading to the remaining 80% of the facility, off limits to the other two for now, though they didn't have the means to open it anyway. Ghosty led Ferdinand into the other half of the research facility, completely dark, though both of them could see just fine, exactly as Nick had expected, since working with the nightmare made an extractor immune to its influence. If it were a living Specter, its natural fluctuations would still work against them, but as a machine, it only ever operated one way. The two stood in silence for a few seconds, taking it all in. There's a lot of stuff, Ghosty said. He hadn't seen this half of the facility either. Ferdinand nodded. It held everything the first half had, and more, nearly as advanced as the full research facility back at Aegis headquarters, and all of it just for the two of them. You'll be our future, Ghosty said. You already said that. No, I mean you specifically, singular. Ferdinand raised an eyebrow. I can't become a protector, Ghosty said. I won't advance fast enough and I'm already getting old, maybe 220 years left in me. As a protector, you could live 1,000 years. You're old too, but younger than me, probably 750 years left, almost 3 times what I have. When I'm gone, someone needs to take over and I think that's you. Ferdinand kept his expression even. This conversation feels a bit premature. You've got plenty of time left. Ask me again in a century. Ghosty chuckled. Fair enough, he said, looking up with a faraway expression. Guess everything I learned today just got to me. I hadn't seen any of it with my own eyes before either. Ferdinand raised an eyebrow. And you believed it all without seeing it. You don't know the technician like I do, Ghosty said. He and my friend are about as trustworthy as people come. I know they put humanity above their own lives, and I was there for some of the revelations myself. I trust them. Ferdinand didn't comment. Anyway, back to business, Ghosty said. We're going to focus on researching star energy. Star energy? Ferdinand asked, eyebrow raised. Ghosty explained everything he knew about star energy and pure energy, and within minutes the two of them were already brainstorming. They both recognized the connection to nuclear fusion, something humanity hadn't achieved on its own yet. Whatever we discover here will probably be obsolete fast, but I think it's still worth doing ourselves, Ghosty said, and told Ferdinand about the Specter Nick had found, the source of all this new knowledge about the different energies. Over the coming years, they'd try building their own version of a star energy generator, and once Nick returned with a superior enlightened one's design, they could compare notes and learn from their mistakes. A rare kind of learning opportunity. I almost feel like a student again, Ferdinand said. Ghosty just nodded, and they got to work. While they labored away, Nick slipped back into Crimson City, no longer needed at the isolated facility. Now that he'd become a demon, he could finally focus on learning more about the Enlightened One's technology, entering unseen, keeping the true value of the central pillar a secret. I don't know how much time I have, Nick thought, flying through the molten metal. Only 3 of the shields understand what my survival actually means. To the rest, I'm still just one of Aegis' experiments. They want proof their investment is paying off. Sure, I helped stop Pride, but I can't coast on that forever. I'm not human to them. They want more, which means I need to keep fighting Specters and delivering results. At most, I can spend a few years down here at a time before I have to surface again. I should make it count. Nick reached the chamber with the dead Extractor, but before descending to the containment unit, he paused beside the impossibly powerful sword. His eyes narrowed, and his body shifted. His appearance stayed the same, but underneath, he became as human as he could manage. Then he crouched and touched the blade's edge. His finger started bleeding immediately. But that was all. His body didn't begin turning to white dust. It works, Nick thought, a flicker of excitement running through him. In this form, I can touch star energy without it destroying me. Though I still can't really use it, my body can interact with it, but if I actually absorb any, it'll reach my Specter core and kill me instantly. Star energy isn't toxic to me, exactly, but I can't use it as a substitute for Prefix or Zephyx. More like water is to a normal person fine to bathe in, but breathe it in, and you're in trouble. Still, water beats acid, I'd say. Nick looked away from the sword and turned his attention to the containment unit below. Let's go say hi, it's been about 2 years.